Hey everyone, welcome to Through the Years, episode 48, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. I'm Trevor Dame. As always, the other voice you're going to hear is the other half of the show, Matt Feuerstein. And in case you probably already can tell, but if you can't, the show is probably it is definitely going to start a little bit differently this episode. Matt and I talked about this last night, and it's something I think we're both a little it's something we wish we didn't have to do because obviously a lot of crazy bad things have happened in the world recently, especially with the senseless murder of George Floyd and just the protests that are going on and all the issues that are being brought up because of this. And it's weird because I think Matt and I, from talking last night, we both agree one of the things that's really good about the show we like is that it could be an escape for people from all the horrible things in the real world. And I know in my life, just personally, when I've had some real bad, like tragedies in my life, like I've turned to my favorite podcast about very frivolous, stupid topics, including pro wrestling, as an escape from the depressing things in the real world. So there's part of me that really doesn't like having to talk about depressing issues on something that might be an escape for people. Well, in fact, I know it's an escape for some people because over the years we've had at least a couple people say, hey, this helped. I used this when there was a bad thing going on in my life and I listened to this. We're not Voices of Wrestling or Bruce Pritchard or anything like that level listeners, but we have some listeners. I can admit that even as the most self-deprecating podcast on the planet. And I don't want to take that away from you guys, but I just feel like it would be weird if we left things unsaid, if we didn't talk about this. I feel like everyone should try and talk about this in whatever forum they have. And what I can promise you is, this is the first time we've done this in 48 episodes. You probably won't do it again. Hopefully we won't have a need to do it again in another 48 episodes. And after we talk a little bit about it, which we haven't planned what we're going to say, I've thought about things we're going to say, but it probably won't be very long. And then we're going to do a regular show, just like we always do. And we can all have fun together for 2 to 3 hours talking about the world of people pretending to fight each other. And we can forget about how bad this year has been so far, but I think we should talk a little bit about this first. So, Matt, it's been a pretty bad few weeks. I feel like the last 3 or 4 episodes, we keep saying, boy, things keep getting crazier since the last time. And I feel like we should stop saying that because maybe we're bringing it on because I don't know how it keeps getting crazier and worse, but here we are.
Yeah, it's true that we don't have as many listeners as Bruce Pritchard, which, leads me to say, like, I should probably just come out and admit I am Bruce Pritchard. Like, that's actually who I really am. So maybe knowing that will get us more listeners and they could hear all the important things that we have to say. But yeah, it's me. Hi, I'm Bruce.
Hi, Bruce.
Motherfucker! See, you get
think
it?
about that Dave Meltzer, Bruce.
It's two layers because I'm being Bruce Pritchard imitating Jim Cornette. And speaking of racism, the sorry, I know I'm making light of something that's very, very serious, and I apologize. But we all have to do things in our way. So I guess if I'm going to comment on this, the first thing I'll say, of course, is Black Lives Matter. And I hope that, we're all on the same page about that. I live here in New York where we've had a curfew now for the past few days. I'm skeptical of curfews. I feel like they give the police an excuse and undue authority to terrorize people who are being peaceful. Or
especially when some curfews lately seem to be announced either right before or even after the time they're starting.
Yes, that has not happened here, but I have seen that around the country. Obviously, we have people out in the streets demanding justice for George Floyd, justice for Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, just one horrible story of, murder of African-American men and women by police and otherwise over the past few weeks. and you combine that with all of us being stressed about being in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic, and I feel like this was eventually going to happen. Now I guess is when it is George Floyd obviously was the match. I don't know what's that lit the fire. I guess you might say it's the flashpoint of
the spark that lit whatever it's been building as for decades and decades.
Before we started recording, I think they mentioned that the other police officers that were involved in his murder were basically bystanders, or not even bystanders, but basically accomplices, however you want to say it, however it looked. They were, that they were all charged with crimes. At this point, I feel like the situation has gone beyond that, and that's not going to be enough to quell the protests. I admire the protesters, and I hope everyone stays safe. They've been very brave, putting themselves in harm's way. I like I said, I hope everyone stays safe. We've been hearing about this same story, this police brutality against African Americans. I've been learning about this stuff since I was born. This was going on before my parents were born, certainly way before that. I sometimes feel hopeless about it because, and this is me as a white person, I feel hopeless, and I feel guilty for feeling hopeless, because I feel like, if other people, especially African Americans and people of color, can feel hope for, enough to get out there and fight, and protest and demand their human dignity and their rights and their freedom, like, the least I can do is feel hopeful that things can change. But it's hard when you realize that this same story has been happening over and over and over and over again. I was thinking about, just like some of the things that happened in the 60s, whether they be the uprisings after, in Watts in 1965 after Martin Luther King was killed, some of the peaceful marches, some of the less peaceful marches, and realize if you went and told those people at the time that we'd be doing this right now, 50 years later, actually, more than 50 years later, I feel like it would be heartbreaking to a lot of people. And I also feel at the same time, like, a lot of them would not be surprised, right? That this history just repeats itself. Time is a vicious cycle. I don't know, so I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I want to be hopeful. But the best, we could do is just support each other, have each other's backs, have the backs of, Black people around the world, people of color in general, people who are oppressed in general, especially those of us who, are in the privileged positions, all of that stuff. So that's generally how I feel about that. I'm sure once you say your piece, I have more to add, but it's kind of hard to collect my thoughts about everything.
Yeah, and it's tough for us to speak on this because we're both 30-something white people. I mean, you're at least an American. I'm not even an American. I'm a Canadian. But, I mean, racism, it is not non-existent where I live. It's not non-existent anywhere. And I just agree with everything you have to say. I've thought the last day, I haven't written this. One of the only things in life I don't take notes for, but I thought that would be kind of weird. I have written some thoughts about racism a couple days ago that are a lot kind of more cynical and angry. They're on my Patreon, but they're completely for free. So if you want to read that for some reason, it would be www.patreon.com/Mecca, no space, MECCA, twice in a row. That's it. And I believe the article is called something like The Selfish Reason to Not Be Racist, because I just felt like the non-selfish reasons weren't getting through to people. So I thought I'd be a little more optimistic here. Maybe not even optimistic, but just not so dour. And I thought about what I want to say. So what I'm going to say is I've spoken a little about this on Twitter and other places, but I'm going to go into it deeper here. I think empathy is one of the most important things in life. I feel like racism and discrimination of all forms is based on fear of the unknown. It's when when people see something that is different from what they know and what they experience, a lot of people, I would say the majority of people, just go, oh, it's different. That's interesting, or cool even. But there's always way too many people, even if it's a minority, that see things that look different or act different or are from a different place or have different beliefs, and they start to fear it because they don't understand it. And people, once they fear something long enough, they get angry, they want to control it or destroy it. And I feel like empathy is the antidote to that, because when you truly empathize with somebody else, when you think about their experience and you seek to understand them, if you're successful in that, all of a sudden, once you understand someone, it's hard to hate somebody. If you really understand their experience, their lives, where they're coming from, why they're different from you in ways minor and major. And empathy is so hard to have because most of us have really tough lives. Oh, it doesn't matter who we are. Even the average boring ass life has its share of difficulties and hardships, and it takes effort. And the last thing most of us want to do when we have free time in our day, when we have an hour when we're done dealing with our own problems, is imagine and learn about the problems of people that are completely different than us. Because if we're successful, it's going to make us more depressed and more angry. And I can understand why, in a world, especially this world right now, where we've got so much crap going on, why it's really hard to be empathetic. But I'm going to ask everybody just to be empathetic, to take a couple minutes to imagine the people that are not like you. And some of our listeners aren't going to have to imagine what it's like to be a minority so I'm just going to ask you to think about something for a couple of minutes here. I'm going to just go through something I've been thinking about. So this is something I looked up. I actually did do research on this Matt I did research on, because I remember I remembered a stat from years ago, and I wondered if they had updated it. So Gallup polls every few years does a thing where they ask people. I'm going to look. I have the link loaded up, so I'm going to read the exact question. They ask this question every few years. So this is the question Gallup polls asks a group of Americans every few years. They go, if your political party nominated a generally well-qualified person for president who happened to be blank, would you vote for that person? So they ask this question, and in the blank they give you a bunch of different things. So for black people, in 2015, 92% of people said they would vote for a black person. That means 8% wouldn't. Now, in 2019, that's improved to 96%, so now we're down only 4%. But some other stats, in 2019, 95% of people would vote for Catholics, 5% wouldn't. 5% wouldn't vote for Hispanics, 6% wouldn't vote for women, 7% wouldn't vote for Jewish people, 20% wouldn't vote for evangelical Christians, 24% wouldn't vote for gay or lesbians. And keep in mind, remember what this question is saying. This question is saying, if your political party, the political party you like, nominated a generally well-qualified candidate for president, would you support them if they were whatever this thing is? And people say no to that still now. So I'm going to just average out those top few things. Just imagine, because one thing I am seeing so much of, which I hate online, we saw Jackson Riker posted, the WWF or WWE wrestler posted some comments, and people found some of his older comments where he said something to the effect of, black people should realize how good they have it because, look at watch 12 Years a Slave and realize how good you have it by comparison today. And we've seen a lot of people
say, well, I missed that. Yikes.
Yeah, and there's been people that have been, people that said, how racist can the world be when there was a black president? Or, we're way less racist than we used to be, or I don't know a racist, so how bad could it be? So I just want people to imagine for a second.
Sorry.
Imagine if no, it's okay. I mean, we need to laugh right now. Hopefully there'll be a few laughs in the regular show. But my little exercise is empathy, is just imagine, let's say you're part of a demographic where that seems to be around the average, where 5% of people are racist against you. You might say, Trevor, that's not much people. And it isn't. In some senses, in some schemes, that's 1 in 20 people. But imagine if in your daily life, when you're even going shopping, imagine every day of your life, whenever you are, you have to know in the back of your head, 1 in 20 people think you're less than them, and they don't even know you. I hate, imagine like imagine the paranoia that would bring on, the justified paranoia. Imagine how you could never feel completely comfortable. I hate the phrase white privilege, not because it's not true, but because I feel like a lot of people that need to hear that, when they hear the word privilege, we kind of just put in our head privilege means a really good thing. And a lot of white people, I feel like when they hear that they have white privilege, they go, my life sucks. Like, what are you saying? I'm getting a privilege for being white. Like, I don't get a check for being white. But I think what people need to I wish they used a different word to describe it, because people that are white have horrible lives. I mean, like, I'm a testament to that. Being white doesn't mean that you can't be poor or unlucky or be the subject of abuse or tragedy, or, if you can still be in a minority even when you're white. You can be subject to sexism or sexual orientation discrimination or discrimination against disability or so many things. But there is a privilege white people have. And that is, in my life, and I'm sure your life, Matt, although you're Jewish, so people know you're openly Jewish, as we saw in that Gallup poll stat, there is discrimination against that. But
that darn 7%.
Yeah, in my life, I never have to, whenever someone is a jerk to me in life, or treats me badly or gets mad at me, I never have to assume it's because of my race. I assume that they're either a jerk or in a bad mood, or they're judging me on the content of my character, on who I am, not what I am. As a white person, that is our privilege. We get to just take that for granted, and everyone should take that for granted. That shouldn't be a special thing. It doesn't feel special to us white people because it shouldn't be special, but yet other people don't get that. So I want you, just for a couple minutes in your life, just think about a world where you can't take that for granted, where there's 1 in 20 people everywhere you go, and having to realize that probably means there's 1 in 20 cops. There's having to know 1 in 20 times you get served at a restaurant. It's probably made by, served to you by someone, again, who doesn't think you're as good as them, who doesn't think maybe you're even as human as them. And if you can think about that for a couple minutes, and you then don't sympathize with what is going on in the streets right now by people who have seen this for generations, who feel like they can't just let the system try and fix itself because the system is broken and corrupt and has failed them too many times, or to tell people that, yes, progress is happening, it's slow, but it's happening, so just patiently wait, when generations have seen this. Just have more sympathy for those that are reacting in anger to generations of persecution than sympathy for the people that are doing the persecuting. That's my suggestion, and that's all I really have to say.
It's beautiful. I love the appeal to empathy. I think empathy is really important, but I think this is why I feel like I'm probably more cynical than you about this. I think it's about, I think racism is a lot more than, I think racism in a lot of ways is about that privilege, more than just understanding the other person. It's about the desire to be above somebody else. The whole concept of whiteness exists sort of in opposition to the people who aren't. Right, like that's sort of how it was constructed, and it's maybe I feel this way more because I'm an American, and like racism is at such a core founding principle of the country. Did you? I don't know if you got a chance to read the 1619 Project in the New York Times last year. Nicole Hannah-Jones, got a Pulitzer for it. But there's so much racism at the core of our founding, to the point where they basically had to write racism into our laws in order to justify the ownership of human chattel, of slaves in America. Basically saying, basically codifying the idea that African Americans were inferior. Because you can't own people if they are equal to you, right? So that's such a bedrock founding idea that I feel like it's going to take such structural awakening for people to really understand that that's what's been going on. This theft of wealth from the black community going back to the founding of the country to many hundreds of years before that, right? The country was sort of built on their labor. And, then we get into the Jim Crow era, we get into redlining, we get into segregation, legalized segregation, school segregation, economic segregation. So there's so many issues at play in racism that I think even changing people's hearts and minds, we need to go further than that, because we also need to change the system that we live in. And people need to, some of us, there are obviously, when we think about things from a class perspective, people of every race are oppressed by the system that we live in, right? Like whether it's, whether you want to call it capitalism or, whatever, the way the system that we live in, basically, where the rich have so much more than everyone else, and people sort of have to live under that thumb. But then imagine the intersectionality of somebody also having to be oppressed because of their race on top of that. I think that's kind of what you're referring to when you talk about privilege, right? This idea that we're all, we all can be oppressed in some way, shape, or form. And certainly there are plenty of white people that are. But then you add in that extra layer where, there are certain groups of people that society always wants to keep at the bottom. Because if they're at the bottom, that means you're not at the bottom. And that's kind of what I think about. So, like, the structural changes that are needed are economic. They involve the police and how the police approach their jobs, how we constitute what police do. They involve the way we educate our people. So I think changing people's attitudes about race is one important step, and having empathy is essential. I just am worried about how we're going to do all the other stuff we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, we're not going to see an end. I'm pretty confident saying we're not going to see the end of racism in our lifetimes. And I think all the best we can hope for is small, like, continual progress if we work incredibly hard, maybe. And even that comes in the form of, I guess not continual, it comes in the form of, like, 2 steps forward and then 1 step back over and over again. And
yeah, like I said, I feel bad being the one to, lecture about this just because I am who I am. Like, I'm a white guy, in America, grew up, middle class, still, have a middle class job. I'm certainly not a victim of this. I can only talk about what I observe, what I notice. I do, just for my part, I would advocate anybody who wants to give, donate to, some of the bail funds going on around the country. You don't have to agree with our beliefs or our politics, but if you do, I think that's a good way. If you're not someone who's going to be on the front lines, marching, protesting, advocating for change in the legal sense and the political sense, giving money to some of there's already aggregators that will split your donation among bail funds around the country. You give money in honor or support of the family of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or, anybody like that. It's, there are things that you can do. Certainly won't end racism. It certainly won't fundamentally change the structure of white supremacy in America or anywhere in the world for that matter. But something small that you can do if you can afford it. Certainly don't give what you can't afford. I'm not advocating that. I'm fortunate enough that I could give a little something. But I don't know. I don't know. I feel, sometimes I feel like I have a lot to say, then other times I feel like I'm completely at a loss for words. I think just as a white person in America, I've always felt this way, but I think we can, white people, we can all be better. We can all be better allies. We can stand up for what's right. We can put our bodies on the line in ways that maybe we haven't. I'm maybe speaking I'm not telling anybody what to do, but I know I could. sometimes your body is the most important thing you can give, and certainly your time, and if you can, your money. We all have our own struggles in life, so it's hard to give time for someone else's. But if this is not your struggle and you can give time to make it yours, I don't know, maybe consider it.
I think that's a great note to end this discussion on, which is just, they're kind of going full circle back from the start where you were talking about feeling hopeless. I would just offer that I have felt hopeless at times during this week too, but there's, whether you have hope or not, there's still only one thing to do, which is to fight to change things the way because the alternative is to just suffer. So, I mean, there is nothing we can do but fight back. And as you, I think, really eloquently put, there are so many ways you can do it. You can do it if you have money. You can donate to there are so many good causes out there. If you have time, you can donate as a volunteer in so many good causes. You can just try and talk to people about not let don't take for granted that your beliefs are shared by everyone you know, or that people just know what you believe. That's part of what I am trying to do here is don't let the good things you believe be unsaid. Just make sure that's more of that is in the world. And there's so many ways. And yes, I don't think we're going to be able to vote our way out of this problem, but there are certainly candidates that are more sympathetic to social change than others. So there's so many things you can do. Some cost money and time, some really don't. Well, I guess they all cost a little bit of time, but everyone can do something. And doing something not only makes the world better, I find in my experience, doing something, even a little thing, usually makes you feel better. So selfishly, even just do that to make yourself feel better.
Like we're doing right now by being two white guys musing on the racial issues in the world today.
Exactly. So Matt, we can move on to a not happier subject. I was going to make a joke and then I decided to bail on it halfway through because there's one other thing. Before, I promise we will do a regular show. It will hopefully have some laughs to be had. This has been a horrible month, and since we've last recorded, there have been a ton of tragedies in wrestling. Shad Gaspard, the former WWE wrestler, he drowned tragically. I mean, all death to me is tragic. Hana Kimura committed suicide due to some bullying online. Danny Havoc, we just learned recently, passed away, and finally Larry Zonka, who not the famous pro athlete as he was. People asked him a million times, but the famous wrestling recapper who just seemingly recapped everything. Just I don't know when that guy slept. He also passed away, and I think one thing, it's always a tragedy when people die. I think the one thing these four people seem to have in common is pretty much everyone that knew them seemed to be saying the same thing, which is basically like, fuck what these guys did in wrestling or around wrestling. Like, these were just great people. Like, let me tell you how great, which is not something you always see. I mean, pretty much when someone dies, you always see people trying to speak well of them, but you usually, I don't know if it's ever this universally personal and positive. And, in Larry's case, I can't pretend that I knew him. I read his work. He liked some of my tweets. I like some of his. So that's, the modern level of interaction on the internet in this world where you don't really know someone, but you've kind of interacted with them. But I'll just say in addition to all the other causes you could donate for, if this one hits home to you, his family has started a GoFundMe. Larry leaves behind a wife and children, and that would be at www.gofundme.com/F/LarryMania -living -on-in-his -girls. I'm sure if you just Google Larry Zonka GoFundMe, it'll be far easier for you to find, but I thought I'd include that just in case. So there's another option for helping people that really need it. And
we really want you to give away your money this month, but they are for good causes.
Yes, and again, we realize it's tough for everybody, and
especially right now. Like this is the worst time for people to be asking you for money, and we are certainly not asking you for personal. Just saying, if you have money to give away, and these might be some good places to give it.
Yes, and the least we can do, I guess, is at least let you know they're out there. But with
Yes.
that, finally, we just do the plug for the old show, the Pro Wrestling Podcast Network. So many great shows. There's a recent one that only has a few episodes called Yours, Mine, and the Truth. And they just put out episode 6 on Owen Hart in Stampede Wrestling, which I think I always love when people do shows on wrestlers everyone knows, but like the less talked about part of their career, obviously, because everyone will point to Owen Hart's WWF work. But I think that's really cool to do an episode on Stampede. Obviously, a lot of talk about Owen lately on another anniversary of his death, because again, what a fun month. And the documentary episode of Dark Side of the Ring that just came out about his life. And yeah, so there's that. And I always like to throw in a plug occasionally for our old friend Chad Campbell, who was one of our early supporters of our show, and remind you that he has a podcast where he and JT Rosero are reviewing the Monday Night Wars every week. And, Chad's one of like the classic legends of the old review podcast. So that's called Wrestling Warzone. It's on a site called the North-South Podcast Connection. So that is all the plugs. That was all the talk about how horrific the world is. Two 30-something white guys telling you what's going on. We are finally now, Matt, we can just do what we normally do. For 2 or 3 hours, we can pretend nothing else exists except this wonderful world of Ring of Honor.
Yeah, man, nothing bad ever happens in Ring of Honor.
So there actually was some news between the last show and the show we're covering in this episode, Glory by Honor 3, and some kind of funny stuff. So first off, this is just an interesting little reminder of the time we were in at this point. This is from The Observer. Ring of Honor booker Gabe Sapolsky's first shows as booker for FIP in Florida are September 24th and September 25th in Tampa at the Sun Dome Corral with a 16-man tournament with some Ring of Honor wrestlers as well as AJ Styles, Gangrel, Justin Credible, and several Florida-based wrestlers. So for those who don't know their history of this, FIP, Florida-based promotion, and around this time, Gabe started booking there too, and we'll see some crossover between the two federations. A lot of Ring of Honor wrestlers going there. Gabe making it almost kind of like a B level Ring of Honor in some ways. Like it was different than Ring of Honor, but it became more of a serious kind of, we're trying to get people from around the world to buy the DVDs type promotion with a lot of the same talent. And it's interesting to be reminded that AJ Styles was actually working for a Gabe run promotion, months before he'd be allowed to or open to doing it in Ring of Honor again.
Yeah, I haven't watched many of the FIP shows from that era, but I've seen some. And, you could tell it's sort of like Gabe just really trying to do a different style of booking, right? Like that's sort of his whole thing. Like they want it to be more like, quote, Southern. But those shows, a lot of them are pretty empty, and it's hard not to notice that as well. You got these guys that are big stars, at least in my mind, as even at the time, like they were big stars to me, and they're wrestling in front of essentially nobody. And, it just shows running indie wrestling is hard.
Yeah, it's funny how much things change in like a year's time. Because I remember, I think in late 2003, when we were covering, I think around that time was Ring of Honor's first double shot. Like Gabe was doing, I think, an interview with the Torch saying like, I didn't get enough time to I felt like I didn't quite put enough work into one of the two shows of the double shot on the production and the backstage stuff because it was so much busier doing like a double shot. And now jump to 1 year later, and not only is Ring of Honor now going to regularly do double shots, he's now booking a whole second promotion. So it shows like, and certainly he adjusted, but it shows like how much his workload changed to the point where a year earlier he was like, wow, doing 2 shows in a weekend is a real increase in the workload and the stress to now that's a regular thing, and I'm going to book a second promotion. Like,
aha. So that's
a lot more.
No, I was going to say, so that's why he didn't have backstage promos on the Death Before Dishonor shows.
He was preparing for FIP, booking that match where Punk and Homicide had the street fight that got into the strip club, that infamous match. I think that's the thing most people remember FIP for, which might be unfortunate. I don't know.
Or fortunate.
It depends how you feel about that match, yeah. Another story from The Observer, and Matt, I didn't know this ever happened. This is just kind of a crazy, when I read it, when I was doing the research, it made me go, what the fuck? This is also from The Observer. CM Punk pulled himself off a September 10th booking for Stars and Stripes Championship Wrestling after being asked by promoter Carmine Sabia if Rob Feinstein could work as his manager. Feinstein said he had turned down the spot as well. Feinstein's first major appearance was at the Mid-Atlantic Convention, where nobody said a word about him being there, at least to his face, and he's going to start attending indie shows regularly from this point to try and turn around the RF Video Company. Matt, I never knew this. I can't believe someone, after all Punk had said, after all that had just happened, what at the time period we're talking, someone's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to book a show. I'm going to book CM Punk on my show, and I'm going to book Rob Feinstein to be his manager. Like, what the like, that had to be just like a stunt booking of, let's see if I can get away with this, and let's see if people will watch if it happens. Like, what the fuck are you thinking?
Do you think CM Punk even remembers this?
I don't know, but I mean...
Does WWE Backstage take call-ins? Because we could ask.
Renee Young, if you're a deep vein thrombozo, a fan of the show for our more recent listeners, that's what we call him, please ask Punk if he remembers when Stars and Stripes Championship Wrestling booked Rob Feinstein to be his manager and he had to back out.
Oy.
And finally, our last little story that happened between the last show and this one. Finally, also from The Observer, I swear to God I read more than just The Observer, but New Japan dropped its New Japan USA show after just a few weeks on KVMD TV, Channel 23 in Southern California. Simon Inoki, the New Japan USA Vice President of Operations, claimed the show accomplished its purpose of letting people in Los Angeles become aware that they had a dojo. Dave writes, well, that's a new one for losing TV so quickly. It had been a mess with time switches and frequent reruns, and the episodes of the show I saw spent more time putting over Ring of Honor than anything else. I mean, it was bizarre. So, yeah, during this time, there was a LA dojo for New Japan Pro Wrestling, and Samoa Joe was one of the trainers there. And I think Rocky Romero was. I think Punk showed up there sometimes. I think Danielson worked there. A young Shinsuke Nakamura worked there. And apparently they had a local TV show. And I've seen other mentions of this in the Observer too, where Dave said, like, the announcers just talked about Ring of Honor the whole time to the point where you're wondering if this was an infomercial for Ring of Honor. It almost makes me curious, Matt, to see if I could find old video of this and see what he's talking about.
If anyone can find it, it is you.
Yeah, I'm sure if I really dug, I could find, there's got to be a tape out there somewhere. But it's just funny to think that, like, all these years later, where the relationship between Ring of Honor and New Japan is gone, like the idea that at this point it was like a weird little thing where a New Japan USA show was talking at Ring of Honor. And it went off the air, Matt, because it accomplished its mission. It let people know it existed. But that brings us to today's show. Glory by Honor 3 took place September 11th, never forget, 2004, at the Rexplex in Elizabeth, New Jersey, in front of a reported crowd of 950 people. There is a lot of news about the nature of the show, so I just got a grab bag of stuff here. First, The Observer said before the show happened that Ring of Honor expected more than 1,000 people for the show in Elizabeth due to the appearance of Mick Foley, so obviously they came a little short of that. PW Insider wrote, from when Mick Foley was announced to be doing this show, which happened in the intermission at Reborn Completion, Mike Johnson wrote, Ring of Honor did the best advanced ticket sales in the history of the promotion after announcing Mick Foley would be appearing for the company on September 11th at the same venue. The promotion completely sold out of choice ringside seats by the end of intermission. The sales were said to be triple the previous record. So even though Foley didn't quite get, Matt, to what they wanted, and it wasn't as high as they drew at the Rexplex for Jeff Hardy, he clearly was a draw for them.
Yeah, it's hard for me to, even put myself back in the headspace of, like, Mick Foley appearing at a show like this. And Mick Foley's one of my all-time favorites, but the idea of him appearing at a show making such a big difference. And then you got to remember, okay, well, in 2004, Mick Foley spent the first few months of the year involved in one of the hottest angles in WWE, had a major match at WrestleMania, and then had one of the great matches of the decade in that company with Randy Orton at Backlash of that year. So he was a very, very relevant figure at the time. I don't know how many wrestlers around now could make that sort of difference in ticket sales for an indie company. You figure, like, I don't know. Who could? Do you think all the big stars in WWE could, or do you think it's a different era where that doesn't really happen anymore?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know they say like for example when Evolve started using WWE guys like NXT guys regularly, even if they were old like guys that had been involved the year before and then had gone up to NXT, that it made a noticeable difference. Even though the buzz online became less, but yet the ticket sales live went up. So maybe there's just a group of people that maybe we're not in touch with where that still matters in a big way.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
but we can all get why Mick Foley was a big deal in 2004, remembering the context.
Yeah, I mean, not only like you said where he was at in his career wise, but I think it can't be overstated that it was really important at this time to have people, respected people in the industry, and Mick Foley certainly one of the most respected and had one of the better images at this time, like to kind of endorse the company in a way, letting fans know that like I'm putting kind of my trust in them, so maybe you can come back too. If you're kind of a fan that was wary because of all the Feinstein scandals, like, and we're getting a parade of people starting around now where we're getting Foley, obviously Steamboat was there the whole time, and then we're getting people that had withdrawn bookings coming in the next few months, like Bobby Heenan, Jim Cornette. We see a promo for him on the show where he had pulled out. Now he's coming back. So really, you know, Ring of Honor probably booking these guys mostly just to try and draw attention and fans, but also there's probably a little bit of the idea of, and of course, Liger coming in too, like, look, these people say it's okay to come back. So, you know, if you were put off by what had happened, like, it's safe now.
It's a good point. Yeah, and this is as far as the people they brought in. You know, Ricky Steamboat's a big star. You know, Bobby Heenan's a big deal, but you know, none of them were as big stars in 2004 as Mick Foley was.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially again, Mick Foley, you know, there's people going to say bad things about everybody, but Mick Foley has kind of a pretty positive image. It's not like some wrestlers, people might cynically go, okay, he's working Ring of Honor, someone will do anything for money. Like people, people like to believe that Mick Foley is generally a little more socially conscious than some people. So he's lending that credence to it. The Observer also noted that this show, with its 950 fans, drew about 250 more people than they drew on the previous show. So if you're trying to quantify exactly how much Mick Foley meant, I mean, there's always other factors, but 250 fans maybe went to a show that maybe wouldn't have otherwise. Ring of Honor, according to the Pro Wrestling Torch, also said it did record merchandise business on that show, on this Mick Foley show, Glory by Honor 3. But part of that may have been also due to the fact they said this was the first show where Ring of Honor was able to process credit card orders live at the show. So they were saying maybe that has something to do with it too. So yeah.
Wow, it took them 2.5 years to get a credit card machine at their shows.
So, yeah, they had to get rid of Rob Feinstein to get a credit card machine. Okay. Finally. It's pretty crazy when you think again that Rob ran a videotape. But I have no idea the logistics, how much it costs, but it feels like you take for granted now that like every pizza guy now has like a portable credit card reader. But
I think that's in Canada. I don't think we got that here in the US yet. I remember I went out to dinner in Montreal for a friend's bachelor party about 4 years ago now almost. And we remember we were all very impressed by the fact that the waiter was walking around the table and taking everybody's credit cards and had like a portable credit card machine that he was doing it with one person at a time. And we were like, man, why don't they have this in America? Because they don't. Like, isn't that weird? Yeah, they don't.
Yeah, I can't speak to all of Canada, but I know in my experience, like I just take for granted that like in the last 5 or more years, it's like I almost never, when I go out to eat, have to go up to like the cash register till they just bring you a portable credit card machine and be like, a lot of times now they don't even do it for you. They're just like, I punched in the numbers, you like swipe the card yourself and just take for granted that you're not going to like do something crazy.
Yeah, no, here you give the person your credit card, they go back to wherever their station and they do it for you. And if you have like multiple credit cards, you're like, can you split it this way and blah, blah, blah. And like, that's how they do it. And they definitely do not have delivery people bring a portable credit card machine. If you're going to pay with a credit card, you got to give them the credit card number online or over the phone, or you're paying in cash. That's how you do it.
Yeah, God.
I know,
That's another reason.
America, we're behind the times.
Truly, this is the worst thing that's happening lately. The worst thing we've talked about this episode. Um,
We're behind the times both on racism and on paying for takeout.
you'll get there on one of those things, Matt. At least one of them. But another note from this show, the Observer wrote, due to a curfew because the building had a midnight event, they had to get out at 10:45 p.m. So they only, and Dave writes only in quotation marks, had a 3-hour and 45-minute window with 5 matches going in the 15 to 20-minute range. So that's another funny. The Rexplex, and I guess we'll talk about it later. Rexplex was a building where things happened. A lot of different things were booked, including maybe some things that happened in the same building during the wrestling show that maybe you could hear going on.
And gauge reaction to those things.
Yeah. So it's pretty funny to think how much was popping, because just to spoil, there's a concert going on and a wrestling show, and apparently the Rexplex has something booked for that area like at midnight. So Rexplex in 2004, the place where everything is happening.
And apparently, but it was closed within like 6 months. So what, Clearly they were intentionally overbooking the place because they needed to, I guess.
That's crazy. I forgot about that. Yeah. And also, I guess the next thing we need to talk about is there was some booking changes. It seems like every Ring of Honor show we've been talking about lately has had big booking changes. This one I'll read from the Ring of Honor's Newswire for August 18th. Homicide versus Mark Briscoe has been signed for Glory by Honor 3 on 9/11 in Elizabeth, New Jersey. So that had to be changed because for injuries to people on both sides. We'll go to the Pro Wrestling Torch. Homicide was in a car accident and will miss this Saturday's show. That's the 9/11 show. As a result, he is scheduled to return to action on October 2nd in Philadelphia. He will be at the Rexplex on Saturday in a non-wrestling capacity. Ring of Honor booker Gabe Sapolsky reported at Ring of Honor's website, quote, just wanted to give a heads up that Homicide is out for 9/11 due to his back being sore from the car accident. He was waiting till the end of the weekend to see if it got better, and it didn't. He expects to be out a couple of weeks. We will announce Walter's new opponent in the Newswire tomorrow. Before any speculation begins, it will not be Bryan Danielson or Alex Shelley, as we are keeping that match intact and leaving the focus on the world title. Kind of an oddly written sentence. But anyway, Danielson is basically defending his future world title shot versus Shelley in that match.
So they changed the Homicide match to a match against John Walters and then got rid of that completely.
Yeah. So just to be clear, yeah. Homicide was going to wrestle Mark Briscoe. Then when Mark Briscoe got hurt in a motorcycle accident, which we'll talk about in just a second, they changed it to Homicide being John Walters' mystery or I guess announced opponent. Then Homicide gets hurt in a car accident. So then Nigel McGuinness has to be John Walters' opponent. And yeah, so we're getting changes on top of changes. That's the kind of luck streak Ring of Honor was on at this point. And speaking of it, I don't know if I think we've mentioned the motorcycle accident before, but this goes into more detail. Dave Meltzer writes, Mark Briscoe's accident last week came when he was riding a wheelie going 55 to 60 miles per hour on his motorcycle, and it flipped over, and he was banged up pretty bad. He won't be on the 9/11 show in Elizabeth and probably won't be back for several more weeks. Jay Briscoe, who is tending to Mark, has also canceled his 9/11 booking. Homicide was in an auto accident on September 3rd and suffered an injured back. He's also off 9/11. And so, yeah, Dave writes, the original match was going to be John Walters versus Jay Briscoe, and then it was switched to Homicide. So now it's going to be Nigel McGuinness, who hopefully won't have the same bad luck this week. So it was this is John Walters' third opponent for Glory by Honor 3, which is, of course, why we call it Glory by Honor 3. Finally, PW Insider wrote, there were some issues with some of the ringside seats being double sold for Glory by Honor 3 last night. The promotion tried to make good by offering refunds and comps for bleacher seats, free DVDs, and also putting some fans upstairs in the balcony section where the hard camera is located. It was human error that caused the mistake, and the company tried to make good to the best of their ability. The promotion had stronger than usual security to prevent those outside the inner circle from entering the locker room, particularly because Mick Foley was debuting and partially to prevent word on Steve Corino's debut from leaking out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was really hoping that they would have just had the people sit on each other's laps. Would have just been a fun way to watch a wrestling show. They could trade, one could be on top, one could be on the bottom. They could switch. I don't know.
And the last thing before we get to the show proper, PW Insider in their live report, Mike Johnson wrote what happened. This did not make the DVD. Before the show opened, the entire roster came to the ring and held a moment of silence for the victims of 9/11. Dan Moff took the mic and reminded everyone of what families had lost that night, that many of the wrestlers working the show were from the New York City area, and said if the United States can make it through 9/11, they can make it through anything. It was a nice class. Go on.
Just interesting to hear that statement right now.
I was going to say, I hope Dan Moff is right. It was a nice, classy moment, although a comment later in the night would blemish it, and we will get to that when it happens, folks. So
keep in mind, this was 3 years after 9/11, and for you youngsters out there, 9/11 was like the overwhelming thing in everyone's mind in America for many years after, and certainly within 3 years, it just kind of hovered over everything. It changed policy, it changed lives. Certainly as a New Yorker, it changed the tone in that city. And we're still feeling the repercussions of it all, 19 years later. But 3 years later, the wound was still very raw. The reactions were still very intense. So, they had no choice but to have something like that. And what we see coming up from somebody in a little while kind of helps you understand why the reaction was what it was. But we'll get to that when it happens.
Yeah, to younger listeners, if there are such things, first, hi, let us know. But also, yeah, if you're wondering what 9/11 was like, basically, I would describe it as like, it's the last time the world felt this screwed up. So what you're feeling right now, that's like the idea that you're just kind of constantly in a state of stress and panic and seeing anger and hatred and division. Like, not that hasn't existed between those 2 years, but what we're getting now is kind of what we felt then. So in a different flavor of it, maybe. But yeah, it's something that had to be acknowledged even then, 3 years later. We open backstage for the show proper on the DVD, where Sugar Sean Price welcomes us to what he calls the biggest show in Ring of Honor history.
It's not.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think so? And I'm glad you just cut straight to the chase there. He's joined by Dunn and Marcos. Marcos hurt his back at Scramble Cage Melee, so he can't compete tonight. Lacey walks in with her Special K friends. She taunts Marcos. She asks him if he'd like a back rub before she just starts to taunt him and laughs at him. Marcos calls her a filthy hoe, and then the half of Special K that really hates Lacey, which is led by Becky Bayless, really likes that hoe comment, and they laugh, and she says, Dunn, you're cool, or Marcos, you're cool. Dixie, who is pissed off, and he's dressed in a dress shirt, which I guess is the sign that the costume sign that he's now taking wrestling seriously. He tells everyone to shut up. He's tired of Special K losing, and he says the losing streak ends tonight. So
in order to initiate Marcos into being even a bigger star in ROH, they have to get him over the misogyny hurdle. And the misogyny hurdle, it's the classic ROH move where if you're not on camera being misogynistic, you are not a true star in Ring of Honor. So Marcos has finally passed this hurdle where he gets to be a misogynist on TV. Will Dunn get there? Because that tag team cannot achieve the level of success in ROH that they need without both saying something misogynistic.
That's what held Dunn back. He just wouldn't cross the line.
No.
And then we get to the opening match, which is Jimmy Rave, escorted to the ring by the embassy of Diablo Santiago, Oman Tortuga, and Prince Nana. And he defeated Dixie, who was escorted to the ring by Becky Bayless and Deranged. And he wins by pinfall in 5 minutes, 39 seconds after he hits the Rave Clash. Matt, pretty short match. It's just another part of this, the start of the push of the kind of relaunched, newly heel Jimmy Rave. How many thoughts do you have on a 5-minute match?
Yeah, it was very short. I feel like it got over what it needed to get over. You know what I mean? Like, it was, first of all, it was nice to have Punk back on commentary. No Mark Nolte, because according to Punk, Mark Nolte's grandma was involved in a horrible parasailing accident. And Punk said that he read, do you know where he said he read that?
Where?
On the Newswire. Didn't have to use the Wayback Machine. He did. He said it. He also
good tonight. I'll say he was on this show.
He was on. He called Dixie the makeshift leader of this bunch of kids. Punk was 25 for the record. but not like the grown man Punk who eloquently spoke on race and racism on WWE Backstage. And we'll soon speak on his having Rob Feinstein be his manager on WWE Backstage. That's a scoop for all of you right there.
Give us credit.
It's going to happen. But, like Rave, it was just basically to get over two things. Rave is cocky, and he needs Nana to help him. And Special K, Dixie in particular, is serious. Right? Those are the two things, right?
Yeah.
So, like, Rave does a bunch of eye pokes because, as we know, eye pokes are what makes you a heel in Ring of Honor. We have established that over the last few shows. We're going to see more eye pokes on this show. It's actually kind of like one of the more surprising things about the past few months of ROH is how many eye pokes there are and how important that is for guys trying to be heels. Like, I guess, I don't know. I guess it just seems so sniveling to do, and that's why it's just such an easy go-to. But I've never seen a company have more eye pokes on their shows. But Rave does some of them. I would say he is showing charisma. Like one of the attacks on Rave as a babyface was that he was not really Mr. Personality, and he's still not good on promos, but he did show charisma in the ring. He would celebrate after like a baseball slide low blow on Dixie. Punk goes, with all these people at ringside, it almost looks like a retarded boxing match. And Gabe goes, I don't think that's politically correct, because as we all know, in 2004, they were very concerned with being politically correct. But
you're missing the best part. Did you notice that after Gabe says, I don't think that's politically correct, he tries to transition away, and he says, this is literally what he says, and neither was that Russian leg sweep. He's saying the Russian leg sweep was also not politically correct. I don't know why.
Well, you can't. It's naming the leg sweep after a whole country. You can't put a leg sweep on the back of an entire nation of people.
Sign my online petition to change the name of the Russian leg sweep.
But Ray pretty much dominates. He gets big suplexes, swinging DDT, gonorrhea. Punk actually corrects Gabe when Gabe calls it a shining wizard. He says, it's just a running knee, Gabe. And this tells me nobody in all those months ever said to Gabe that wasn't a shining wizard. That's remarkable to me.
And it's a great example of Punk actually being one of the guys brave enough and in the position where he can actually just kind of openly be like, Gabe, you're doing it wrong. I imagine a lower level guy, if they knew that, that tells me that Jimmy Ray, either he didn't watch the DVDs of his matches, or even he was like, I'm not going to tell Gabe that this isn't a Shining Wizard.
Or he's like, look at the Shining Wizard I can do.
What do you mean you have to step off the knee?
But Rave wins with the Rave Clash. I thought this match was what it needed to be. Wasn't anything great, wasn't anything you need to watch. But thumbs up. It was a light opener. Rave was cocky. He was a heel. The moves were okay. Dixie was taking things more seriously. It's a perfectly fine opener. You might even say it was there.
I don't have much more to add to what you said. This was mostly a showcase kind of squash, although Dixie did get a little bit of offense, but this was mostly just about, again, continuing to reintroduce Jimmy Rave as the heel. And yeah, he definitely, I think Mike Johnson, who was there live, wrote something I don't know why, but a robe or whatever. He said something being part of the embassy has somehow managed to inject a little charisma into Jimmy Rave. And it really is true. He is more charismatic and he's still not overflowing with charisma at this point in his career, but it's a noticeable difference as a heel than a face. There is something to his character now instead of nothing in terms of how he works the crowd and things like that. And another little Punk commentary note, he calls when Dixie takes a drop kick to the groin, Punk says that Dixie took it to the lower nutsack region, which I thought was just another classic little Punkism. And this was another match that this match got shuffled around too, because this was supposed to happen on the last show, actually, this exact match, Jimmy Rave versus Dixie, but it got changed because of the injury to Mark Briscoe. So they shuffled around the card, and so Gabe made sure we were not deprived of this 5-minute Dixie Jimmy Rave match. He delivered on his promise show later, so good on him. Yeah, and after the match, Prince Nana and the Outcast Killers join Rave in the ring. Someone in the crowd is jawing with Rave. We can't make out what they say. Rave holds the ropes open and tells him to get in the ring. Nana's on the mic, and he then calls his fan a fat girl and says, how dare she show up looking like an animal? Nana says the embassy's on a roll and the paperwork has been signed. He's introducing the newest member of the embassy right now, Mick Foley. Music plays, but Foley doesn't come out.
You left out one very interesting sentence by Prince Nana. He says, "We are winning the takeover of Ring of Honor," which I don't know what that means, but it's an interesting sentence.
Nana tells the music guy to do it one more time, and Nana reintroduces Foley. Foley still doesn't come out. Nana then says that maybe Mick has some butterflies, and Nana's going to go straighten it all out so Mick will come out later. So this is a little storyline that will keep playing out over the whole first half of the show.
A cute little classic wrestling tease.
Yeah. We cut to
a pro wrestling tease.
ProWrestlingTees.com. A less objectionable pro wrestling tease. Don't know if you know that story, but
I do know that story. We're being topical today.
Cut to backstage where Gary Michael Capetta is with Samoa Joe in a promo that an on-screen graphic tells us was taped earlier tonight. I don't know why this was the one promo that got that.
So random.
Yeah, Joe's wearing a Japanese Steve Corino Ichiban t-shirt from 01, which I don't know if it was just a coincidence or is a little bit of a wink to let us know, hey, Corino's here. But Gary says Joe has always owned this event, Glory by Honor, and Joe kind of recaps his history with it. He says in Glory by Honor 1, he debuted and he left a mark in one of the most brutal matches in the history of the sport. At Glory by Honor 2, he successfully defended the Ring of Honor World title against Christopher Daniels. And tonight at Glory by Honor 3, he faces Doug Williams. Joe says his goal is to solidify himself as the most dominant champion in wrestling today. At this point, Gary reminds Joe that Doug Williams was chosen to be his opponent tonight by the pure champion John Walters. So for those who don't know, kind of the conceit for the show was Glory by Honor 2 had that thing where Punk and Raven, who were feuding at that time, got to choose each other's opponents. And so the idea by Glory by Honor 3 was it was going to be the pure and the world champion were going to get to do the same for this show. And Joe decided he wasn't going to pick John Walters' opponent. Gary asked Joe who he selects to face Walters tonight. Joe says he didn't choose an opponent for Walters tonight for one reason, going on to say that the pure title, which with its, quote, kitschy set of rules, unquote, was only created to placate the boys who can't beat Joe for the world title. Joe says he didn't pick an opponent for Walters because he doesn't care about the silly pure belt. Gary asked Joe how does it feel that he has a loss to Homicide on the last show. Joe gets intense. He says they're not here to talk about Homicide. Joe says the Homicide chapter has long since closed, and tonight's about Doug Williams. Joe finishes up by saying he'll worry about Homicide when he gets his shot at the title. So
Joe left out that he lost at that first Glory by Honor, by the way. He was like, I made my mark, but never mentions that he lost.
Yeah. So a lot going on here, and the promo in a sense continues on because even though Gabe from behind the camera says cut, we get a classic Ring of Honor trope of the camera actually staying on, and we pan over just a couple feet to see that Jay Lethal was leaning against what looks like a kitchen area just a couple feet away during the entire promo. Joe asks Jay if he's ready for tonight. Jay sheepishly says yeah, and Joe asks if yeah is all he's got. Joe says Jay's not ready and asks Jay if he thinks that this is all a game. Joe then slaps Jay really hard in the chest, and he says to get ready because if he doesn't win tonight, he's out of Ring of Honor. He's done. Joe says he tells Jay that Matt Striker, his opponent for tonight, likes to use an ankle lock, and he's about to tell Jay how to beat Matt Striker, and he hands him this piece of gear, I guess, to wear around his ankle. He says, you'll need this. And then Joe ushers Jay away to tell him, I guess, how to beat Matt Striker, which is funny because it's one of those things where it's like the whole conceit of these little parts of these promos is supposed to be like the wrestlers think the camera is off so they can really have a heart-to-heart. But even then, Joe's like, let's walk away from this camera that we were just told is off so I can tell you this in private, even though technically this is supposed to be private now.
He doesn't want the cameraman going to snitch to Stryker.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good way to put it. But so yeah, we're just.
I guess that's why they're like it was earlier tonight because then the next thing you see is Lethal out in the ring. That seems unnecessary, but okay.
Yeah, so, and that brings us to the next match, which is a match with a double stipulation. Jay Lethal's Ring of Honor job and Matt Striker's East Coast plane tickets are on the line in this match. Jay Lethal defeats Matt Striker via pinfall in 4 minutes, 23 seconds when he reversed a Striker lock into a roll-up small package type thing for the win. So an even shorter match than the opener on the show. This was, I would describe as short and pretty slight as a match. There isn't a ton to it. Striker did wrestle with a bit more intensity and a bit of a mean streak than he often does, which is, I always like this level of Matt Striker better. Although there was also kind of a couple botches in a match this short, like, well, at least one, where he does a super kick, but he hits it really, I think, lower than he intended. It only gets to, like, Jay Lethal's lower midsection. Not even he does get above his lower nutsack region, but still to the lower midsection. And it's one of those things it's another one of those matches, Matt, where even though I've not been Matt Striker's biggest fan, I feel sad because this is kind of, in some ways, I find losing your East Coast plane tickets to be an even more emasculating stip than just you lose and you're out of Ring of Honor. Like, we'll still book you, but just when you can drive here. Like, and we haven't seen that stip since, I believe, late 2002, where Punk and Cabana wrestled in a match where it was kind of the opposite, where it was the winner got plane tickets and the loser still had to drive.
Yeah.
We get the opposite here, where if Striker loses, he loses the plane tickets. The crowd was even chanting "na na na na, hey hey hey, goodbye" before the match even started to Striker. And I also liked how there's some moments where Gabe's commentary, it's like honest in an almost admirable way, because it's almost undercutting the stip, but it's just him being honest, because Gabe could have said, like, if Jay Lethal loses this match, you'll never see him in Ring of Honor again, and then just renege on that later. But Gabe actually says, even though he knows Jay's going to win here, he says, if Jay loses tonight, he'll be dropped from the Ring of Honor roster until maybe spring of next year. So I love that, like, even, like, Gabe is, he's being honest enough where he's like, look, if he loses, he's not going to be out of a job forever, just until we need another crop of guys. And Gabe mentioned on commentary, it's all about the wins in Ring of Honor, so why this stip is happening is Jay's been looking impressive lately, but he hasn't been winning, and also Striker's been in a slump, so that's why we're kind of doing this stip where we're punishing whoever loses. But, Matt, again, I don't know how much you have to say about the body of work in a 4-minute something match, but am I wrong to feel kind of bad for Matt Striker at this point?
Well, so this is one of the things that I'm most critical of on the show. The work itself was fine. I did not expect the match to be that short. Like, it really knocked me for a loop when it was over. I was like, well, that's it? I was very surprised. But here is what I didn't like about this. I don't feel like this was built up at all. Like, I feel like, I don't remember commentary talking that Jay Lethal or Matt Striker's jobs were in jeopardy. Do you remember them? Anything talking about that?
No, like, they definitely both, like, yeah, Lethal was losing and Striker was kind of in a slump, but they weren't, the commentary, wasn't trying to sell over the last few shows this story. Maybe it was more in the news wires, but they were trying to, commentary certainly on these shows wasn't selling, like, they're in trouble, which is a storyline Ring of Honor would sell it for other wrestlers at other times, like the idea of
Jimmy Rave.
Needs to win soon.
Yeah, it's just, and like, yes, I've talked about this before, that there's like multiple continuities. There's the Newswire continuity, and there's the DVD continuity, and sometimes they forget to put the storylines they're pushing in the Newswire onto the actual shows, and there are people that don't watch the Newswires. Like, people reviewing the shows 20, 15 years later, 16 years later. But
people who maybe spent 45 minutes yesterday trying to find get archive.com to load up the newswires for this month and couldn't do it.
Didn't you think of that, Gabe? But people in quarantine, right? As there are riots going on outside, trying to find out information about Matt Striker from 16 years ago. Didn't you think of that?
A very normal problem so many fans are having today.
Yeah. But they like, it just all of a sudden they're like, okay, Matt Striker, not only is his job in jeopardy, but like all the fans hate him. They never really mentioned that. Like, I remember he got booed pretty badly at the last Jersey show, but they didn't really make a point of it, did they? Like, did they really talk much about that?
I don't think that really that much. And, again, I don't think Matt, especially when he was paired up with other faces against Generation Next at some of these shows, like, he wasn't positioned as a heel. He's just a guy that the crowd happened to like really getting on his ass.
And the funny thing is, maybe it's not funny to him, but like, I felt like Matt Striker was sort of doing a little better once the Generation Next stuff started. Like I thought he was in a slump for most of 2004, but I thought he had good matches with Generation Next. I thought the crowd was on his side in the Midwest, and he even mentions that. Oh, we'll get to the promo where he says, like, they appreciate good wrestling in the Midwest. But I don't know. It just like this stuff just felt too out of the blue for me. The match itself was fine, completely forgettable. I liked a couple of the moves. I like Lethal. He did like a I don't know how to describe it, like a running flip drop kick in the corner, which you don't really see him do that much of in ROH. They did a chop battle, which you would not expect from these two. And do you know how Matt Striker cuts off that chop battle?
I forget. Tell me, Matt. Tell us all.
A poke to the eyes. And because, Matt Striker's a heel in this match. And, then you just get quickly into the cradle. So I guess Joe's secret was cradle him up when he puts on the ankle lock. That probably wasn't a very long meeting. But I wonder how Joe knows that, because I don't remember Joe doing that to Matt Striker, but maybe he did and I just forgot. I don't know. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that match.
Going to the point you made on the first couple of matches about so many eye pokes and stuff, do you think it's just a sign of the times that so many of these indie wrestlers in like 2004 grew up probably on like mid-80s WWF? So like to them, when they're some of these guys probably having to be a heel for one of the first times or an early time. So like to them, like, oh shit, how do I be a heel? Whatever I saw on Superstars in 87, like kind of you're just going to the most simple kind of the things you grew up on.
Yes, I think that's part of it. I also think, if you're a good enough wrestler, ROH fans are going to cheer you. And nobody's going to be like, yeah, that eye poke was awesome. So it's like, it's guaranteed to get boos also. So I think there's that. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's like when Mick Foley wrote in his first book about how, like, his ECW era, where to be a heel, he realized he had to be a heel by doing stuff like headlocks, because otherwise, if he just did some cool move or bump, people still weren't going to boo him. You had to basically do a move that was so kind of boilerplate and boring that people wouldn't get behind it.
Yep. And they did it.
And I was going to say something else, but I forgot. But it's okay, because it's just Jay Lethal versus Matt Striker in a 4-something minute match. Oh, I was going to say also, Matt, we saw in the last little promo that just before this match, Joe giving Jay Lethal a piece of gear and saying, like, I'm going to show you how to beat Matt Striker. Did that piece of gear really come into play? Because after the match, like, the announcers don't they don't reference the promo, even though conceivably they would have watched it while this was recording, maybe, or I don't know.
I forgot about that gear, but that was just like an ankle brace thing.
Yeah.
So I guess the idea was it prevented Stryker from getting enough twist on that ankle and allowed Lethal to do the reversal. That's the only thing I can think of. But you are right that they did not explain that in any way.
Because Lethal's still selling his ankle pretty hard after the match, keeps grabbing it and limping and stuff, but yet like there's no like Greg the Hammer Valentine, like Ron Garvin moment where like the brace neutralizes Matt Striker and like Jay Lethal's like, aha, like it doesn't hurt at all. Like there's nothing like that in this match. He just rolls up Matt Striker for the win.
I feel like that would undermine any ankle locks any wrestler ever did if that device existed.
So after the match, the crowd continues to chant, na 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 na, hey hey, goodbye at Matt Striker. Jay keeps selling his ankle. The two eventually shake hands, which is interesting. They're not going with a full-blown Matt Striker heel turn, even in the face of all of this, even with what's about to come. Lethal limps to the back. Stryker grabs the mic and he says everyone is real happy that he just lost his plane ticket to the East Coast. He says he blames each and every one of the fans for this, saying that while he goes out there and gives 110% every night, they sit behind their desks and their keyboards like cowards. And they say, oh, Matt Stryker's boring. Stryker says that's fine because he's going to go back to the Midwest, except Matt doesn't initially say Midwest. He botches it and accidentally says, I'm going back to the East. He catches himself, but it's too late. The crowd notices this. They start laughing at him, booing even more. The crowd chants, you fucked up, Adam. One of the rare times you'll hear a Ring of Honor crowd actually chant, you fucked up. Stryker tells them to, quote, eat shit, unquote. I wonder how much of that at that point is legit anger. Stryker says he's going back to the Midwest, where they respect him and treat him like what he is, a wrestling god. He tells the East Coast to kiss his ass, and then Stryker goes to the back, jawing with some fans along the way. Not a bad promo from Stryker, except, of course, he made a mistake at the worst possible time. And Matt, going to what you were saying earlier, I do feel like what you said is true, where there's a little bit of like a late Ring of Honor career Xavier thing here, where Matt Striker actually was kind of ticking back up again in terms of his performances, but at a time where the crowd or the booking had kind of already given up on him. And
yeah, I mean, that mistake that he made was, opportune, I would say, considering he was trying to be a heel. But my favorite part of the promo was on the way back. After all this anger from the crowd, a guy yells, and you could hear it very clearly, "See you at dinner, Matt." Like he was going to just be hanging out with all of them at dinner. I really enjoyed that.
I would love if there was a family member that was like legit, like, don't forget the dinner reservation. Like, I'll be outside the Rexplex later. Like, just Olive Garden, Matt, and just something like that. But
it's Jersey, so they probably did go to the Olive Garden. No, just kidding. No offense to my Jersey people. Don't kill me.
So, so it's funny because Matt Striker, he had enough charisma.
I love Bruce Springsteen. He's literally my favorite. Don't kill me. I swear he is. Look on my Twitter. You'll see.
I would love if all the things that like gets us hate or anger or like threats after tonight's episode, it would be New Jersey Olive Garden comment. That would be fitting for some reason. But
you're right.
It's funny that Matt Striker, like, I actually feel he does wrestle at least for one or two more shows, I think, in Ring of Honor. But he does legit lose his East Coast plane ticket, he only does it for like local Dayton shows and stuff like that, Midwest shows. But I do think there is an alternate world where Matt Striker could have harnessed this legit hate and kind of had a Jimmy Rave-esque career resurgence as a mid-card heel for Ring of Honor, but it just doesn't happen for him.
It's actually sad, like within a year, he will be almost forgotten in the sense of like there's another Matt Striker that will be in the news and he will get hired by WWE and people will make jokes like, oh yeah, there was another guy named Matt Striker with a Y, and like almost like he was like just forgotten about in this scene, and that is unfair because this Matt Striker was better than that one.
Yeah, like whatever complaints I have with Matt Striker, he probably deserves to have a bit more of a legacy than one, he had a unibrow, and two, he's literally the guy where you go, yeah, he's that Matt Striker. No, not that Matt Striker. Like his legacy is basically the guy with the Y, which is he deserves a little more than that.
I agree.
Some legit, really good matches in 2003.
I definitely agree.
And going on to the six-man mayhem, Trent Acid defeated Ace Steel, Angel Dust, Fast Eddie, Izzy, and Cahagas debuting in Ring of Honor. Don't get too attached to him. In 7 minutes, 52 seconds, when Trent pins Angel Dust after he hits his inverted brain buster. So Trent Acid continuing his little gimmick of king of the multi-man matches. His reign as king of that will end soon. But Matt, a classic six-man, multi-man, scramble-ish type match. What do you think? How did it stand up in the canon of the millions of these we have seen at this point?
Well, first of all, I feel bad for Cahagas because he didn't do anything wrong in this match, but I don't know if I've seen too many matches where a guy debuts in like a match, like a big spot fest match, and stands out less than Cahagas did. Like you just totally forgot about him. Like I'm trying to even think about what he did. Like he did a few neck breaker moves to Acid. He did like a stunner type of thing. Like he does very, very little. He doesn't really stand out at all. So, missed opportunity for him, I guess. Didn't make the most of it. Was he ever back on an ROH main show again?
I'm not even sure, but that should tell you something. That even if he wasn't around enough to even make an impression where I know the answer to that.
Yeah, he does some knee strikes. I don't know. I would say
it wasn't a match fitting for him, probably.
Yeah, it wasn't the right match for him. Like I said, did not look bad. He just didn't look like he just forgettable. But I thought the match was hot and cold. Like there was some real sloppiness in a couple of moves, like this crazy weird like reverse Rana thing that Acid did, I thought was actually cool. Like, so basically what happened was Fast Eddie was going up for his like fall away slam off the top on Angel Dust, like almost like a moonsault slam. So Acid climbed up and hit a reversed Rana on Eddie, who was still holding Angel Dust. So he does his flip slam while being Rana'd, and I thought it worked. Like, I was sure that would be a clusterfuck, especially considering, like, Acid has been known to have a few of those. And I thought that move worked. I thought it was cool. Like, I thought that was probably the highlight of the match. But as far as other stuff, I'm trying to even think about like what some of the highlights were. Like at one point, Angel Dust tries to do a running knee, knocking Fast Eddie over the top, but they get like tangled up in the ropes. That's pretty sloppy. At one point, Izzy stands on Acid's back and he does a moonsault drop kick to Angel Dust, who's on the top rope. However, he can't get all the way over on the moonsault, so he just like slams down senton style on Acid's back, and that did not seem like it was fun for Acid. But at one point, Gabe was like, "Special K is fighting each other," and I was like, "They're opponents. They are, literally wrestling against each other." So I don't know. But they do, their pile as he hits a springboard, corkscrew dive. Acid hit an acai moonsault. Eddie does a twisting dive. Then you get Haggis' neck breakers. Steele hits an implant DDT on Haggis, but Eddie breaks up the pin. Then you have that reverse Rana that I talked about. Then Izzy hits a reverse Rana of his own on Acid for 2. Steele breaks that up. Ace hits the spinal shock on top of Izzy. And then everyone is hitting each other with kicks and knocks them out. And then Acid grabs Angel Dust with a reverse brainbuster and gets the win. Definitely not the best of these six-man mayhem matches, but there are a couple of spots that I thought were very, very good. And, sometimes you take what you can get from matches like this.
I actually like this match more than you. I thought this was like a pretty good one of these kinds of matches. I thought it, wasn't very long, didn't overstay its welcome, which is always a plus, to be more concise. And this is one of those matches where we've talked about it before, but just it really shows the difference in indie wrestling or wrestling in general, where the high flyers of the old days were all about just, can I do something cool, whether I can nail it perfectly or it looks fluid and clean, or if I can even hit it with a higher than like 70% success rate. Like, it's just, but yet I sometimes I miss that. Like, there is a charm in the old in some of these wrestlers who, even like the spots you described, which are highlight spots like that Trent Acid one, like, they don't look super clean and polished. Like, they always look like a wrestler's on the verge of like, even when they hit it, it's like they just barely pulled that off. Like, they're
definitely
they did that. And sometimes in a way, it's really great that we have wrestling now where everything is where the average wrestler is so much more, especially like a flyer. These kinds of wrestlers are more polished and their mechanics are so much smoother and more sound. But then there is something exciting sometimes when I'm in the right mood for it, of just these skinny guys that can barely pull things off, where you feel like they're just walking a tightrope and they barely know how to walk a tightrope. They know just enough to make it to the other side. And it depends what mood you're in. It depends what you like. And I guess it kind of, this was a night that I watched this match where that charmed me maybe more than it charmed you, and maybe more than it would charm me on a different night. And I do think that the Izzy Angel Dust stuff, Gabe was trying to sell that, like, he was trying to further the dissension between the two sides of Special K, and where he was like, there's no hesitation, where I guess, it is tough, because I get what you're saying, which is they're in a match where it's everyone for themselves. They should be hitting each other and stuff. But I felt like Gabe was trying to almost cover for that, where he's like, the fact that they never once had like the standard kind of hesitation spot or even work together, where it was always they just very quickly wrestled each other. It didn't come off like they hate each other, but Gabe was kind of trying to sell it like, this is dissension because, they're having no problem, wrestling each other. And I thought the sequence they had was one of the highlights of the match, just very fast and fun. And I thought Izzy stood out in this match. He's a guy that has been standing out in a lot of these matches where it's fine. I just talked about how I like this match because it's kind of crazy and sloppy, but I thought Izzy stood out because he was probably the least sloppy and most polished guy in this match. And it's another weird point in Trent Acid's career where he's winning this match, but his push is really kind of over in Ring of Honor. If you look what happens to him in the next few shows, and this is another one of those matches where he felt so hot at a certain point in 2003, like the Homicide feud. And we've been saying lately, like, this is another one of these multi-man matches where he's king of the multi-man matches. And apart from that huge spot you talked about that he was in, he feels like the third or fourth most interesting guy in this match.
I was surprised he didn't win, since they were still pushing that persona.
He did win.
Oh, you're right. Yes,
yeah.
No, you're right.
He loses one of these soon.
Yes.
This is like kind of the end of that run, I believe.
Yeah, I was looking at a note that I had that where I messed up, but I realized, yes, you're right, he did win.
Yeah. And the only other note I have from this match is Gabe said at one point on the commentary that the Rexplex has become the Madison Square Garden for Ring of Honor. Did you ever feel that way, let alone right now? I mean, it was a place where they were trying to put on big shows, but I felt like they had a few cities at this point that were on like a similar point. You got Philly. You would have Chicago would start to emerge. Boston still got some big shows, but like him saying like the Rexplex is now MSG for Ring of Honor.
I honestly sort of do see what he was going for there. It is where they would hold their like big epic shows for a little while. They had the big WrestleMania weekend show. They had the big Reborn Completion where all the big angles happen. The Mick Foley show. Obviously the first Death Before Dishonor might have been in some ways the biggest. And then they have two big shows at the place the rest of this year. So I do sort of see it. Philly, they were kind of had it for a while, but Philly kind of got all screwed up because they had to have it outside in a tent at a small venue a couple times. The next show is actually their first show back at their supposed new home, the Armory, the first show back since Final Battle 2003, which is so almost a year between shows there. So they've had small crowds in Philly over the previous year. So I can sort of see why he's saying that for the Rexplex. Also, it is their de facto New York City location, even though it's in New Jersey. It's as close as they were getting to New York at the time. And I think there was sort of a thing like they wanted to say they were running New York and that was their big venue. So I get what he was going for, even though it didn't totally work out that way.
Those are good points. I'm glad I asked you because, yeah, you made some good points. Also, like, did the MSG ever have, like, the Grateful Dead playing during, like, WrestleMania 10 or something in the same building? Because then that would also, with what's coming up later, maybe help the MSG comparison. Like, during WrestleMania 1, was there, like, a jam band that you could hear playing during the Hogan and Mr. T tag match? Because then maybe I could understand this also a little bit better. But
They couldn't because WrestleMania 10, I'm being like now super pedantic, but at WrestleMania 10 they actually sold tickets to the theater, the Forum at the Garden, for people could watch the show on big screen at the same time.
Yeah, I remember like that on like the pregame show or something. They were like hyping that, I think.
Also, I think Crush and Macho Man fought in there. In their Falls Count Anywhere match too, or Macho Man went in there afterwards and was like celebrating with them. That was actually the same place that they had the I believe the first Lions Den match. That was in that theater too. In the old days, actually at MSG, they would always sell that place for the big shows. So probably the first WrestleMania that was sold too, I'm guessing.
Maybe tonight I'll just watch WrestleMania 10 again and pretend that the world doesn't exist. That sounds good, actually.
Yeah.
I got 4 donuts waiting for me. I can just eat way too much sugar. Anyway, enough about my plans. Let's move on to CM Punk defeating Austin Aries via pinfall in 18 minutes, 57 seconds with a schoolboy after Steve Corino returned and helped distract Austin Aries. Before the match starts, Austin Aries got on the mic and he asked Mick Foley to bring what he called that sack of doorknobs he calls an ass to come down to the ring and face a real wrestler one-on-one. Foley, again, doesn't show up.
By the way, is this Aries' first ever solo mic time in ROH?
It might be, and also like later, it must be because I was struck like there's a promo near the end of the night or right at the end of the night with Generation Next, and they let Aries speak a little bit, and I was just struck like, whoa, for some reason it caught me off guard, and I think it was probably partly that we hadn't heard him talk much, if at all, in Ring of Honor yet, and also partly because he clearly does not have the Austin Aries charisma he would get later in his career at this point.
Yeah, I say he grew more on the mic in some ways than Danielson did.
Yeah. Anyway, this match was a disappointment. This match felt strangely off. It's funny. Sometimes people say like, oh, those guys felt like they were wrestling two different matches. This literally, to me, felt like they were wrestling two different matches. Like, the first 6 minutes of this match is Punk just doing almost nothing but working over Aries' arm. And there's actually some fun parts of it. Like, I like some of Punk's arm work. I like that he like did the Irish whip where he holds onto the arm, so the guy trying to like wrench the arm out of the guy's socket. I like there was a sequence where Aries keeps kipping up out of things, trying to get out of arm locks, and Punk keeps getting him back into it or putting him down. But yet, I have a little internal rule, I guess we could call it like Dame's Law, where, or not even Dame's Law, more like Dame's suggestion. I would never make it a law, but that the more time a match spends on working over a body part, the more selling and more of a payoff it should have. If you just work over a body part for like 30 seconds and then forget about it, I'm not going to get mad. If you are like in this match where Punk spends like the first third of the match working over the arm and then keeps going back to it whenever he's on offense, I would like Aries to sell it better. Aries selling in this match felt like he remembered half the time to sell the arm and then half the time didn't and would just use it and not sell it. And likewise, it doesn't really pay off into a satisfying finish because the finish has nothing to do with the arm. It has to do with interference. And also, Punk, the only real big thing it comes into play, like in terms of anything substantial late in the match, is Punk goes for the Fujiwara armbar a couple times, which, because it's a move he doesn't usually use and hasn't ended matches with, doesn't get much of a reaction. But mostly it just felt... Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, by the way, if you're running the Through the Years wiki, make sure you add in an entry for Dame's suggestion.
Dame's suggestion. I want that to catch on. Like, I'm trying to get Joe Gagney's rule to catch on, which is the Joe Gagney suggested idea that when wrestling fans stop watching wrestling for a while, they might never come back because they realize that maybe life's okay without pro wrestling. So I've been trying to credit that just to Joe, even though I've seen other people make that point.
Wrestling counts.
Gagney's law.
Wrestling counts on people for whom life is not okay.
Exactly. But yeah, this match felt like, it's weird. Like, it didn't feel like these guys, like sometimes when people say a match has no chemistry, I think they feel like they're really saying a match has bad chemistry, like spots are off or they're not communicating well. This match didn't feel like they had bad chemistry. It felt like they had no chemistry. Like, just like I said before, like they were wrestling two separate matches. Like, Punk was wrestling this very throwback kind of body part centric, kind of more stripped back, not so crazy and match, and Aries, whenever he got on offense, was wrestling just a standard for this era. Austin Aries, fast-paced, high-impact offense, not a lot of focus, just Aries match. And they didn't seem, it really did feel like two separate matches. And then there were a couple spots that didn't look great. There was like a really ugly looking DDT by Aries on Punk. There was a crazy dive by Aries over the top rope where it looked like Punk barely caught a piece of him. I don't know who was at fault for that, but this was one of those shows too where, because it's the Rexplex, they're landing on like a hardwood basketball court floor with no covering. So that probably had to suck. And then you had the finish where Generation Next runs in, and then eventually Corino runs in. We've been seeing more of these interference finishes, and he fights them off, and that distracts Aries, and then Punk gets the win. And I don't necessarily mind the interference, but what I did mind was the camera actually missed the finish of this match, I think, Matt, if I remember correctly, to show us like Corino and stuff on the outside. Like, we missed the roll-up, which I felt was another kind of... And this match overall, I would say like it's average to maybe like 2 3/4 stars, which would be like slightly above average, because there is some action. And again, most of what they do mechanically is fine. It's just these two guys were very good wrestlers who both had been in some great matches in recent months. And the idea that they were given almost 19 minutes and the best they could do is like, it was watchable. This is honestly one of the more disappointing matches I've seen in Ring of Honor in a long time at this point in its history, in my opinion. What do you think? Like, how much of that do you agree with?
I guess all of it. Pretty much. I wrote something similar at the end. I said, this match was disappointing It wasn't a bad match, and I wrote it was much closer to being a good match than it was to being a bad match, I would say. Would you agree with that? Like it was
I would
closer to good than bad.
I would say there were some ingredients in this match that could have been part of a really good match.
Yeah, but it had a very restless crowd, and I think part of it was like what you were talking about, the arm stuff early. You know, I'd say if they had cut that down dramatically, that would have been an okay segment, but it kept going and going and going. And in fact, I think Gabe even realized this match was a big draw because he actually did his little, we're time to pay the bills, and he like plugging the website and all that and the upcoming shows. He actually did that during this match, which is very unusual for him to do it during a match in the first half of the show. So we knew this match in some ways was like a star power level main event, but the match itself, I think part of it is also there was a reputation that Punk had as sort of being treated like a heel in New Jersey, even after he turned face. And obviously this is like the first match he had in New Jersey after he turned face. And you could tell there was the dueling chants. The crowd was not firmly on his side. They're not making a ton of noise. And I thought maybe as I was watching this, maybe this show just doesn't have a good crowd. But watching the rest of the show, I thought the crowd was pretty good. So it really was just the match, right? Aries at one point tries to do a hold with Punk in the ropes, and I was like, this ain't a pure title match, Aries. Can't do it. It also was funny that Aries came, like at one point was doing a comeback. He was doing like his like spinning elbow thing, but he threw off his elbow pad like he was The Rock. But then afterward, he picked up the elbow pad and put it back on, which I don't think I've ever seen The Rock do that one.
I love that the idea that like, well, safety first. Like this one move got to have the effectiveness of the bare elbow, but I'm not going to be an idiot. Like it's one of those strangely sensible things that seems weird in wrestling. Like
shots fired at Mick Foley for doing something alluding to his tag team partner, but. As far as the match, I felt like in some ways it kept going, but I did think like the later part of the match was pretty good. There was Aries went up for the 450, Punk cut him off, Punk went for the plunge, Aries fought him off, hit a sunset flip power bomb, but Punk rolled through and hit the power bomb to a series of boos. I thought the booers were kind of annoying, but whatever, let them have their fun. Punk hit the Welcome to Chicago, which now Gabe was correctly identifying. Went for the Fujiwara. Aries fought off, made the ropes. This whole segment I thought was pretty good, but the crowd was not really reacting that much. And that's how you could tell they had sort of lost them, especially guys of this caliber. And that's when, the Generation Next ran in. Actually, when Generation Next first ran in after the ref bump, I was sort of like, what was the point of all this? Because, basically they just, Strong and Evans run in and Ace runs them off. And I'm like, what was the point? But then Shelley appeared with Corino, and I was like, oh, okay. I think that that actually worked to set it up. I thought the Corino appearance was actually pretty cool. I popped for it because I did not remember that at all. And it'd been a long time for him to come, and a surprise return is cool. And when it's a star and it actually is a surprise, which again it was for me here. Did you remember that Corino returned on the show?
It was a surprise watching. I forgot, and I don't know about the newswires, but yeah, it was a great surprise in that they never telegraphed it in any way, which sometimes Ring of Honor at this point did. They didn't do anything to hint that this was going to happen.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought it was actually a really cool moment. The end, that part got over. The match didn't really get over, but the ending got over.
Yeah, and it was cool to see Corino back. One other thing is going to the notes. The Observer, which often you have to remember got some of their live reports from fans, but also sometimes they got notes directly from Ring of Honor officials. The Observer wrote that the only disappointing match on Glory by Honor 3 was said to be CM Punk over Austin Aries, which didn't click, even though both have had some really strong matches of late. So it's funny that even the live reports, for all we know, could have come from Gabe. It was acknowledged that for some reason these two just didn't click. Although ironically, I haven't seen this match in a long time. I'd have to dig out my VHS tapes and my VCR. But kind of an interesting trivia note, Matt. The 2004 Ted Petty Invitational for IWA Mid-South, which is one of the most star-studded, kind of a who's who of indie wrestling tournaments ever.
It's unbelievable. If you just watch the highlight video of the entrances, it's just what? He was in it? And he was in it? And he was in it? I didn't even know he was famous yet. And he was in it? Like, it's just insane.
It took place literally 1 week after Glory by Honor 3, and a first-round match was CM Punk versus Austin Aries. And I'm pretty sure, in my memory, is that match was significantly better than this.
Yeah, it definitely was.
So in that case, it might have been Ring of Honor's loss, might have been IWA Mid-South's game, because maybe this helped them work out the kinks, you know.
Yeah, can I actually just do an interlude and list all the people in this freaking tournament?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so in the 2004 Ted Petty Invitational, think about this based on now. Samoa Joe, Roderick Strong, Nigel McGuinness, Claudio Castagnoli, a.k.a. Cesaro, Chris Sabin, Rain Man, okay, you know Rain Man, Danny Daniels, Todd Sexton, but then AJ Styles, Jimmy Rave, Matt Sydal, Sal Rinauro, Super Dragon was in it, Eric Cannon, Petey Williams, BJ Whitmer, Chris Hero, Mike Quackenbush, Nate Webb, Hallowicked, CM Punk, Austin Aries, Bryan Danielson, Alex Shelley. All of them in the same tournament. And how many people, you know, attended those events, like in terms of in person? You're talking about maybe like what, 300 at most? Maybe less?
And for those who, like, I believe, don't quote me on this, this show should be either on High Spots video streaming service, or maybe even independent pro wrestling's website. I forget the name of their service, forgive me, but there's a site that does indie pro wrestling streaming that has a lot of old IWA Mid-South shows. But these three shows, it was a 3-day it was a triple shot weekend, and these shows are absolutely worth revisiting for both just quality and just the holy shit, look at this collection of talent. And Matt, just to add to that, let's point out, those weren't the only matches on the shows, because Ian Rotten was famous for running crazy long cards with other matches. So Jimmy Jacobs defeated Delirious in a ladder match on the first night. Sal Rinauro was on night 2. Ian Rotten, of course, the owner, was there.
Mercedes Martinez, you know, all the way back in 2004.
Larry Sweeney, Daisy Hayes,
Eddie Kingston. Yeah.
Just like the insane number of, like, it's a better card than pretty much probably any indie wrestling show ever.
Yeah, it definitely
the number of names.
Definitely on paper, it's like the most star-studded, packed indie show I could think of.
You're getting almost all the best Ring of Honor talent, plus guys that weren't booked at this time, like Mike Quackenbush, you know, like...
Yeah, well, who's really missing from this for ROH? Basically just Homicide and the Briscoes, right? Like, that's pretty much it, yeah.
And Homicide was hurt in a car accident, so,
right.
I mean,
right.
And the Briscoes were hurt, so yeah, like, just an insane talent. So, yeah, I always love revisiting that show, because that is just such a crazy event. But
wasn't the only Ted Petty Invitational that had an incredible... group of wrestlers on it. 2005 was also pretty good. 2006's was also pretty. You know, they basically had a lot of great ones. For over the years, actually, if you go to I'm looking at the Wikipedia right now. If you go to 2007, you got even a young Chuck Taylor appearing on that. So Joey Ryan, just Ricochet was on it. So. Ted Petty Invitational is a go-to event if you have that High Spot service.
Yeah, absolutely. And after the match, Punk and Corino embrace. Punk gets on the mic and he tells Aries that he always told him that on Aries' best day and Punk's worst, Aries could never beat him. And he just showed why, because Punk is always one step ahead of Aries. Punk says that if Aries wants to make his name at Punk's expense, he's going to have to fuck with Punk's friends too. Gary Michael Capetta at this point has made his way into
if you want to be my lover.
He wants to know what the backstory is on Corino's return, and Gary reminds us the last time we saw Steve Corino in Ring of Honor was at the no ropes barbed wire match he had with the Homicide the year before. Gary asks Steve what the hell is he doing in Elizabeth, New Jersey, but before Corino can even say a word, Homicide's music hits and out he comes in street clothes. Julia Smokes is right behind him, and then those two get in the ring and they stare Punk and Corino down. Homicide takes the mic and also brings up that the last time they were in the ring together, they were in that barbed wire match. Homicide says Corino beat him, but Homicide never tapped, bitch. Homicide says in February he walked away from wrestling for a while in that famous angle, Matt, we talked about where Homicide acted like he was retiring forever and then came back almost immediately.
Yes. Well, in the same promo, he asked that he was retiring forever and then said, "I will definitely be back."
That is still one of my recapping that promo. I forget what show, but it is still one of my favorite moments.
The Last Stand.
Yeah, in Through the Years history was recapping that promo.
Yes.
So he says, in November after the barbed wire match, Creel offered Homicide his hand, and Homicide says, I didn't take it then because I hate you, and that's a shoot. I always hate when Homicide always goes, I hate you, but that's a shoot. He always has to do that. Homicide starts yelling at specific fans in the crowd. He uses a homophobic slur to get a big pop for one, right before he goes back to Corino. Homicide says that Corino was right about something, though, which is that Ring of Honor sucks, their management sucks, their fans suck. And then we get an awkward cut to cut out a comment Homicide makes, which we'll talk about in a second. Homicide, then we see him say that he now will shake Corino's hand because he was right about Ring of Honor sucking. The crowd loudly chants "shut the fuck up" at Homicide. So he's actually something that he isn't always able to do because people love Homicide. He's getting some real heel heat here.
Well, he did a good thing if he wanted to get heel heat.
yeah. Again, it's coming. Homicide crosses his Smokes has to hold Homicide from jumping into the crowd. Homicide crosses his heart, I guess, as a show of honesty, and he asks Corino again to shake his hand. Says he'll give him the respect he deserves. Corino stands still for a bit, kind of teasing the moment, until Punk pushes him into the corner. He tells Corino not to do it. Homicide and Punk shove each other, and Homicide tells Punk to mind his business. Homicide says Punk doesn't want problems with the Rottweilers. Just look at the Briscoes, I guess maybe implying that, like, he did something to Mark Briscoe's motorcycle? I don't know. Homicide asks again for a Corino handshake, but Punk stands in between them. Corino and Punk leave as Corino keeps holding up one finger, I guess suggesting that he wants to have one more match with Homicide, even though the way he left Ring of Honor last time was kind of like him being done with Homicide forever. Anyway, Homicide proceeds to have a tantrum. He flips over the timekeeper's table. He kicks the barricade. He throws chairs around ringside. The crowd chants Homicide. Homicide and Smokes yell at one particular ringside fan, and the segment ends. So if you're wondering watching this, what is the weird, awkward cut that is not in any way really well hidden, we'll go to the PW Torch. On the September 11th Ring of Honor show in New Jersey, Homicide attempted to draw heel heat by claiming that he wished the Ring of Honor fans had been in the World Trade Center on 9/11. The company and Homicide himself quickly issued an apology. Between comments like this and this one and an AOL Instant Messenger, Ring of Honor is finding problems for themselves in the strangest places. Torch VIP member Liam Harvester says, quote, on the official Ring of Honor board, Gabe posted an apology from Homicide as well as one from himself on behalf of Ring of Honor. That's a very classy act. While I personally don't think Homicide crossed the line in trying to get heat from a crowd that didn't give him any, it was still the right thing to do because I can understand why it would offend people. JBL and Vince should learn from this because JBL had recently been in trouble for the goose stepping during a German WWE house show. And then finally, Matt, before I throw it to you, the Observer wrote on the same incident. Dave wrote, in the tasteless remark, maybe of the year, Homicide said that he wished that Ring of Honor fans were in the World Trade Center on 9/11. Gabe Sapolsky said that was the one negative about the show, and he didn't want it, and he immediately apologized for it. And
like he got on the microphone and apologized for it?
No, not live, but yeah. I guess Gabe, the point was Gabe like went to the internet, like if this wasn't a thing where they was waiting for days, like they immediately knew, like,
gotcha.
Homicide shouldn't have fucking said this. You know?
I mean, the easy way to get out of it was Homicide just say, no, I wish they were in the World Trade Center on 9/11/2000. It was a beautiful day. They could have gone to Windows on the World. It would have been great.
Oh, God. But, yeah.
It's been long enough that I can make that joke, right?
Yeah.
19 years.
We're already at the new tragedy, so the old tragedy is
yeah, exactly.
It's a World War II thing where we can make jokes about Hitler now.
Exactly. Were you in that new thread order chat on the actual 9/11?
Yes, there used, for those who don't know, this is very inside baseball, but me and Matt first came to know each other. And when we were teenagers, on a old message board that was called the New Thread Order, which was an outgroup growing of a Scott Keith message board. So this is way back. And
if anyone remembers the NWWW ThROH. That was the original message board that had, well, we don't have to get into it, but that's how we knew each other.
Yeah, there was a lot of people on the fringes of things like current Sherdog writer Tom Feely, Justin Shapiro, who people who listen to our show will know, like a bunch of people.
CRZ.
Exactly, CRZ. So, but anyway, there was a very famous chat that I still remember, which was right after I woke up on 9/11. We always had a daily AOL chat where it was just always on and people were coming in and out. And I remember after seeing that 9/11 had happened, logging on, and as soon as I log on, I get a chat invite that just says you have been invited to chat in a room titled "Flee to Canada." And it was just full of everybody being scared, trying to find out who in New York was okay.
Feely was. We were all worried about him because we didn't hear from him for hours.
Yeah, there was, I think, multiple people in Newark where we were literally like waiting to see if they were going to come online.
I was upstate at college.
Yeah, safe and sound.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Matt, quite a detour, but I don't know what much there is to say about that comment, except I guess that like I think it would be even worse now, the reaction to it. They got off light compared to what I think people would treat them. Like right now, for example, if wrestling comes back in like a month, if someone made a joke about like the racial riots or even COVID, probably, like if Homicide said in a month from now, I hope you get COVID, I think the reaction would be worse than they got for this.
Well, mainly because of Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is kind of interesting that even though Corino was kind of a heel and Homicide was a face, they're having to bring him back now where Corino is the face, is this ally to Punk, and Homicide is now the heel, even though he's actually giving Corino what he kind of always wanted, which is respect from Homicide. And it's like this weird because the times have changed since Corino left and the characters have all changed, that Corino is kind of walking back to everything being kind of flipped a complete 180.
It's not the first time in wrestling that something like that has happened also.
No.
But yeah, this was a good segment, I thought, other than the homophobic comments and what was cut out. Like it made the show feel big. Like it felt like a big segment for the show. But also it was interesting to see the crowd reacting big to everybody except for CM Punk. Like that's very rare in ROH for the crowd just to not give a shit about Punk compared to the other people on the stage.
Punk was an interesting guy. You kind of touched on this earlier, but Punk was an interesting guy where a lot of times when you hear talk or watch old wrestling, you always hear stories of like, when this guy was working the loop, like this city really liked him, but this city was never as big on him. In wrestling nowadays, you don't notice that as much, but Punk, I feel like, especially in this era, was kind of that guy where for some reason certain cities were more pro-Punk than others, and not just his hometown, like Chicago either. Like there was definitely cities that were more anti-Punk than others, even when he was a face.
Yeah, I mean, Rexplex in particular, which is funny because when he won the title in 2005, that was in New Jersey, in another town in New Jersey, and they were so into him there. But at the Rexplex, they just never got him. I don't know what it was. But hey, the quirks of wrestling makes it interesting.
Yeah. And that brings us to another short match, although we'll get into a little bit of the background why it was so short. BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff defeated Chicano and Slash Venom with Allison Danger in 3 minutes, 6 seconds when Whitmer pinned Chicano after he hit him with a wrist clutch exploder onto an open chair. So before the match, Allison Danger runs to the ring and she screams on the mic as usual about how she gave Moff and Whitmer everything. She wants revenge. And of course, the whole storyline continues to be Allison Danger owns Moff and Whitmer's contract. So even though they quit her stable, the Prophecy, she's now booking them in all sorts of matches where she wants these people to just destroy them. And the gimmick tonight is the idea that even though Moff and Whitmer are in the main event, which is a big multi-team match for the tag titles, she's double booked them against Chicano and Slash Venom, who are Slash Venom might be better known to some as Flash Flanagan, who I think worked in like developmental for a while. And these two guys we talked about, I think on a very recent show that Ring of Honor, a few of their guys had worked in Puerto Rico for like a show that was branded like Ring of Honor versus IWA Puerto Rico or whatever. And that these two guys were on the show. So I'm wondering if maybe I just impressed people. And this match only went 306. And I thought, man, I was writing in my notes like, why does Ring of Honor so often do this where they book new guys and then they give them barely any time to shine? But Matt, then I read this and it kind of tells you sometimes you can't make assumptions, because Dave wrote in The Observer, when it comes to this match, they were told to go 6 minutes, and they rushed so much they were done in 3 minutes 6 seconds. So people only got a taste of Venom and Chicano, but what they did looked good, including Venom doing a Sabu triple jump spot to the floor. Just because of the cost of bringing them in from Puerto Rico, they don't look to be back anytime soon, even though Sapolsky liked both of them. So kind of sad, because I guess you can tell me what you thought, but I thought they did look good in the little bit we got to see from them here.
Yeah, I would say because you never saw them again in ROH, I was going to assume this was just a total squash, but it wasn't. Like they actually got to control a little bit, and Venom hit that triple jump moonsault. Chicano got to do a swanton, but he missed, and then Whitmer did the exploder, and the match was over. It was just like, yeah, they looked good, I guess, but the match was so nothing. Like, it wasn't even a squash. Like, it was just short. You can't really be a squash if you're losing the whole match and then just win at the end, right? That's not really what a squash is. It was just super duper short. And really the main focus was on Danger, dressed kind of crazy. Like, she's dressed in like a raggedy like gown or dress, and then she has like the long gloves and her hair is all disheveled. So she's supposed to have been going crazy. And also, Moff had the American flag over his head coming down, and he was slapping everybody's hand. And it just made me think, will wrestlers ever slap hands ever again? That's something I'm thinking of.
I'm you know what? For some reason, I feel like wrestling will be one of the things that does not change. They will go back to just everything.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're like, have to be physical with somebody, you might as well slap the hands of a bunch of strangers and not wash it for a long time.
I feel like that's what's going to do is it's going to be one of those things where it's like you're in for a penny, in for a pound. Like wrestling's such a thing where it's like, if I'm already doing this much physical contact, what's some more? Like,
yeah.
I wrote my notes. Moff comes to the ring draped in the American flag, in case you were wondering if he was supposed to be a face this week.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, go on.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I even wrote the same thing. I said, wow, true baby face. You don't really see guys slapping hands in ROH that much, but Moff was doing it.
So, yeah, very short match. It must happen, but it is kind of interesting. I don't hear too many examples of a match where the guys actually rushed through and, like, didn't make use of the time they were given. Like, I wonder if that was just nerves or something or what, but the idea that you got 6 minutes and you actually do it in half the time. But there were some chair shots. It was a big brawl and, some big, couple crazy moves. And but of course, the big thing is it's all leading up to what comes up after the match. Danger gets in the ring and she browbeats Chicano and / Venom for not being able to take out Moff and Whitmer. Chicano and / Venom just exit the ring, which of course leaves Alice and Danger alone in the ring with an angry Moff and Whitmer. Danger begins to scream and panic when out of nowhere, Mick Foley walks to the ring and breaks it up. The crowd just goes nuts. They start a huge Foley chant. Moff and Whitmer bail to the floor, which leaves Mick alone in the ring with Alice and Danger. Danger says, "Oh my God, you came." And Foley, who's grabbed a mic, says, "That's exactly what my wife said last night, except she added the words, 'so quickly,' again," which gets a big laugh. Mick says he doesn't mean to be mean to Allison because he finds her moderately attractive in a skeezy, psychotic kind of way. Foley then does his cheap pot spot where he plugs, that he's in Elizabeth, New Jersey at the Rexplex. Foley tells her to take her moderately attractive face and get out of his ring, which she does. Foley is then interrupted by Prince Nana and the rest of the embassy. Foley gives hugs to the Outcast Killers and Nana, and then he high-fives Jimmy Rave, at which point I wrote in my notes, "This is awesome." For some reason, it still felt like a cool, like, meeting of two worlds moment, even in 2020, to see Mick Foley, like, hug the Outcast Killers and high-five Jimmy Rave. Anyway, Nana says, "Mick, it's good to have you in the embassy, my friend." "Yeah." And Foley says, "Nana assumes because I hug you guys that I'm joining you, but really I'm just a good hugger and I wanted to show off that skill." Foley then says, "You guys, thought I would join you," and he does this huge big fake laugh to answer them. And he dares them to come on if they want to fight him. He lays out the Killers with mic shots. He drops Nana with a punch, but then he gets low blowed by Jimmy Rave. The embassy all start putting the boots to Mick. Generation Next then run in to join in and start beating down Foley. And then Moth and Whitmer run back in the ring. They chase them all the way, just the two of them on their own. Foley recovers. And he says he came to Ring of Honor because he received a phone call a few weeks earlier asking him how he'd like to come to Ring of Honor. Mick says he heard all about Ring of Honor, but he's not going to associate with something he can't be proud of. So he asked Ring of Honor to send him some tapes, send him some DVDs too. Well, I guess he said tapes and then he said DVDs. I wonder if he was like, tape sounds kind of old-fashioned. Anyway, Foley goes, I watched them, and after just a few minutes, I said, holy shit, and I don't curse often. The crowd's like eating this up at this point. Foley says if he had any athletic ability, he'd be stealing all the moves he saw, but what impressed him the most wasn't the moves, but the attitude, saying when he was coming up, wrestling wasn't about how much merch you could sell, but about giving the fans the best shows possible. Foley says in WWE he tried to do that, but he admits that sometimes he'd be in front of 20,000 fans and he'd think to himself, take it easy, so he could come back and work in front of those same 20,000 fans again one day. Mick says the guys in Ring of Honor don't think that way, and he singled out Moth and Whitmer by name, who had remained in the ring during this entire Foley promo. Foley says they're like him back when he was trying to have the best match every single night. Foley says he knows Ring of Honor is about pure wrestling, but he says he saw something else in those DVDs. He saw Jay Briscoe damn near bleed to death. He saw Moth and Whitmer in a street fight he'd be proud to call his own. He saw Abdul the Butcher, and he saw the Scramble Cage. Foley says he came to Ring of Honor to pay respect to the new legends in the business and to say that Ring of Honor stands for Ring of Hardcore. Mick finally ends. He says, bye, have a nice day. He shakes Moth and Whitmer's hands and leaves, and he's slapping and hugging fans on the way out. Matt, I thought this I talked for a while, so I think you should get the first out of this, but I'll just say I thought this was a really we'll see a lot of these kind of big legend comes in and puts over Ring of Honor promos. I thought this was a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the originals, right? Like,
yeah.
And he was so over. He's got such a huge pop. I will say this before I get into that. So at the end of the match, Danger reamed out Venom and Chicano, right? Yeah. And I realized in that moment that those two guys do not fit in ROH at all because they just walked away without gratuitously beating her up or calling her a misogynistic name. And I'm pretty sure that one of Moth and Whitmer, when they corner her before Foley comes out, I am pretty sure one of them calls her the C word. So they fit into Ring of Honor. Venom and Chicano, they do not. So, good choice.
Your point before, Moth is definitely a face right now in Ring of Honor.
By Ring of Honor standards, yes. Yeah. Saying the C word to a woman made him a face.
Done and done. They're going super face.
Yeah, exactly. Marcos. But Foley, Foley was great here. I don't know that I totally think that the Ring of Hardcore thing worked the way they wanted to. It didn't really amount to much. I don't know if you necessarily would have known that at the time, right? It amounted to some matches with the Carnage Crew and Moth and Whitmer, right? Which is not anyone's dream match as much as those two teams, can be good. Foley eventually transitioned to his feud with Samoa Joe that didn't actually turn into anything really either, right? Yeah. Because Foley didn't end up doing the match. But just as far as watching a guy be entertaining and feel like a big star, this was good. And he had something to say, and it was actually of substance. You could tell he really did watch those DVDs because, of course, he did, right? It's Mick Foley. He loves wrestling. So in that sense, I would say it wasn't a great segment in that it didn't change much, but it was such a good segment. Foley was so good. He just had such star power, such charisma, such ease. And, we know he's one of the great promos of all time, and he gave one of the great promos in ROH up to that point.
Yeah, I think the key to this is, like you said, we're going to see a bunch of these in Ring of Honor. Like you said, this is one of the first. But a lot of these, you get the key with these kind of promos where the big legend comes in is I love Ring of Honor. You guys are the new whatever thing I was, 10, 15 years ago. This is it. Insert promotion here. A lot of them just, the ones that are average or bad come off as you don't really mean it. You just barely know anything about this. You just came here because you got paid. But Foley's was detailed enough, and that it came off as genuine, and he definitely, when he mentioned like the matches to support the Ring of Hardcore thing, he brought up the right matches. Like if you're going to bring up the more brutal aspects of Ring of Honor that are really cool and that were relatively recent, like the street fight with Moff and Whitmer versus Ace and Punk, and the Jay Briscoe Joe Cage match. Those are the two matches to bring up, other than maybe the Homicide Corino matches. So, and I guess the other thing is I completely agree with you about this would lead to a not maybe not as cool as it could have been, like hardcore versus pure wrestling kind of philosophical feud with Rick Steamboat. And we might have Ric Flair to blame for that, Matt, because I'm going to read from The Observer. When he would recap this Mick Foley promo, Dave wrote, Foley then said that if he had any athletic ability, and then Dave wrote in brackets, a jab at Ric Flair, although I'm not sure people caught it, he would steal some of the moves he saw. And then Dave wrote later, the idea is to do a hardcore versus wrestling feud, again, based on Flair's comments in his book. So for those who people don't know what Dave's talking about here, this was right around the time, or not too long after, Ric Flair's autobiography had come out, To Be the Man. And Flair said some not flattering things about Mick Foley, and Mick responded. In fact, I believe this was the weekend where Mick recorded his straight shoot interview DVD for Ring of Honor, which if you want what's kind of like a sequel to Mick Foley's first two books, it's a good shoot interview DVD. I'm sure it's not in print. You'd have to go out and try and find it. But there is a whole section of that DVD where Gabe literally just reads line by line the crap Ric Flair said about Mick Foley, and Mick just responds to it line by line, to the point where you're almost like, maybe this is going a little too hard in this direction. But this was like a big topic of conversation in 2004. So it's kind of interesting. I wouldn't think until I did the research and was reminded that I guess a lot of it was like that. Like even like Dave wrote that line where Foley just said, if I had any athletic ability, I'd steal those moves. I just took that at face value until I read this and was reminded apparently that was one of the things Flair wrote in his book, which was that Foley had zero athletic ability and, couldn't really wrestle and all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's very memorable. It led to some actual like on TV feuds between Mick Foley and Ric Flair in both WWE and in TNA later. But this was like the first pass at addressing it on a wrestling show. And yeah, you're right. It did kind of go over my head even watching it back, like that's what he was referring to.
Yeah, I guess in a weird way, Ring of Honor basically tried to do the Mick Foley Ric Flair feud before WWE did it.
Just without Ric Flair.
Yeah, and with Rick Steamboat as like the proxy for Flair, and without actually doing matches with Mick Foley. But they tried their best to kind of get onto that train. They would have been the first to do it. It's just they couldn't actually get Mick to wrestle.
Flair and Foley had some great promos relating to that in WWE a couple of years later.
Yeah. We cut backstage at this point to Gary Michael Capetta. It's intermission. He's joined by John Walters. He tells John what Joe said tonight about the pure title not being worth anything. He asks if he has any comments for the fans. Walters is really mad. He's upset about it. He says the fans didn't think it was possible for him to be the champ. He says all the doubters are going to eat their words. And then Walters just says he's going to march to the ring and defend his title. Walters, not the most compelling promo guy.
No, the one thing that was noteworthy about this promo was that Walters sounded a little bit heelish, right? Yeah. Like he sounded angry, and we know he does turn heel in the not too distant future, but not yet. And he sounded very angry at the fans. They don't believe in me. They don't think I can win. There are many doubters out there. He's going to prove them wrong, So there was that, but otherwise, not the best promo.
I actually noticed that. I noticed that too. I'm glad you pointed that out because, like later when he comes out, I believe like Walters is slapping hands, and I felt like it's really weird because, like the promo, while it's not a heel promo, it definitely has like that almost Matt Stryker vibe where it's like, you fans don't believe in me, you don't like me, and that then to see him come out and be like slapping hands like he's Dan Moff with an American flag, it was kind of a weird. Two blending things on the same show, but
it was I wonder if it was actually even an intentional tease for the heel turner, if they had even decided that was going to happen yet. I don't know.
I'm not sure. Elsewhere backstage, Sugar Sean Price was with Walter's opponent, Nigel McGuinness. Nigel says he's been in Ring of Honor for 13 months now, which seems crazy, I guess because he's semi-regular and
right,
we took so long to do the podcast.
His first match was 13 months earlier, but he was not on a lot of the shows.
Yeah. He says he's both nervous and excited for tonight. He says Ring of Honor officials have told him from here on out he's being booked on every show. So tonight he's got to start that run strong, either winning or stealing the show trying. Nigel says he isn't in the USA to play. He's in it to win it, which I believe is the first time he ever says that catchphrase in Ring of Honor.
It is, and he doesn't usually use the USA to play part. In it to win it, though, we hear that a lot over the next year or so.
Yeah. So, and that brings us to Bryan Danielson defeating Alex Shelley via submission in 19 minutes, 21 seconds with the cattle mutilation. On paper, this is like kind of a technical dream match for the era. Matt, how did you think it was in practice?
Yeah, I bet when this match was signed, people were freaking out. Like they were like, "Holy shit, this match is going to be awesome!" Right? I thought it was very, very good. Like, I didn't think it was amazing. It wasn't like the best these guys could do with each other, but I thought it was really good. They do a lot of neat sequences. My favorite part of the match was when, like, the period where Danielson was like just like picking Shelley apart. Like, there was a part like near the middle of the match where he's just taking him apart and with his holds and all this stuff, like hitting his I'm trying to get to the part where it's like, yeah, like going against the neck, he does like arm breakers. And one of my favorite things about Danielson from this era is that he's just willing to do the same move over and over and over again, which a lot of wrestlers don't do, but like just logically it makes such good sense, to be like, well, if this move is working, just keep doing it. And, like he would do it against Aries with the body slams, but also just like arm breaker after arm breaker after arm breaker. Like he would slap him multiple times. He even does like a camel clutch that looks brutal. Like he does like a crossface with the camel clutch. Do you notice how like Danielson in this era, and I don't think it actually is true forever with him, but in this era, any hold that he does, even if it's the simplest hold, just looks so much more brutal than when anyone else does it. Do you notice that?
Yeah, and the other thing, it's not just that it looks more brutal, but I feel like they say like the difference between guys like Chris Benoit or Eddie Guerrero and other wrestlers was other wrestlers would learn a move until they could do it, and they would learn a move until they could do it like perfect. And I feel like when you see Danielson, like even on the moves where it looks brutal, like it looks like even the simplest move looks special when he does. It's like he just is absolutely like completely comfortable with doing it.
Yes, I agree. He's like, I'm not going to learn it perfectly. I'm actually just going to do it better, and that's what he does. As far as like the rest of the match, because that's my favorite part. Like that, I just can watch that all day. But I thought the crowd was pretty amped up for this. Shelley did some good stuff too. Working on the neck. Does the drop kick to the back of the neck. Even does a border city stretch early, and Dragon gets the ropes very, very quickly. At one point, he does this thing where he's like, the move that Shelley does, where he gets the guy's head between his legs and just like bounces it into the mat over and over again. Mm-hmm. He does that to Danielson, and when I see that, I always think about Danielson's concussions, because it's like obviously his head is hitting the mat, not at the force that we're supposed to believe, but like we know now what Danielson has been through concussion wise. At one point, Punk actually says that Shelley is at a weight and a height disadvantage to Danielson, and that didn't seem obvious to me, that Danielson was either bigger or taller than Shelley. But maybe he is. I mean, Punk would know better than me, right? He stood next to both of them. But does that seem true to you? That Danielson...
it's not like a noticeable, like where you'd go, that's a huge advantage. Like, you would never think if someone is 1 inch taller than you or even 2, that height advantage is really going to come into play. Yeah,
but I even just like the bulkiness, like, because Danielson was not at his biggest muscle-wise in 2004.
I would actually say Shelley probably has a little... if you ask me which of those two guys at this point weighed more, I'd say Shelley.
Just based on eyeballing it, yeah.
Yeah, he's a little softer and has like a little bit more bulk maybe, and Danielson's a little bit slimmer, like more athletic.
Yeah, I agree. Then They bring up some Foley talk here. Punk actually, I was surprised, took a real stand against Foley. He was like, "This isn't Ring of Hardcore. This is about wrestling. This is Ring of Honor." I thought that was interesting. I don't know if Punk really gets too involved with the Foley stuff. I don't think he really does. But as far as like coming down the stretch, they do more. They do more picking apart stuff where Danielson he twists Shelley's arm and elbow and wrist all while digging his knee into Shelley's back. Then he snaps the arm back. It's just, I love that stuff. Danielson then gets the cattle mutilation. Shelley gets to the ropes quickly. They do one of those where Shelley reverses the top rope belly to back into a cross body cover, but then Danielson reverses that into his own cover. That's always fun. I've seen Danielson do that a few times, actually. He might have even done that against Aries. I'm not sure. But so Dragon does the airplane spin, and Shelley actually breaks it up by dragging Dragon's legs, but Dragon just like butt drops on him, and then hits the diving headbutt for 2. So Shelley hits the shell shock just out of nowhere because he's been getting kind of controlled for a while. But he gets the shell shock out of nowhere, goes for the border city stretch. Dragon makes the ropes. Shelley goes right back to dropping Dragon's neck twice over his knee. And then his arm gives out when he's trying a suplex, and that allows Dragon to hit a big European uppercut off the middle rope. They do this cool final sequence. Dragon gets the cattle mutilation. Shelley reverses back into the border city stretch. Dragon actually stands up in the border city stretch and hits the regal plex and goes right back into the cattle mutilation, and then Shelley taps. I thought the final sequence was really good. I thought they were definitely holding a little bit back, but they told a solid story. The crowd was up for it. And it was good. It was very good. I would put this match at the very good level, and I know they could do even better.
I would put this just at a solid good. I was disappointed, but I still enjoyed the match. But I think one of those things is I forgot, this is a match I had seen a long time ago, and I forgot how I felt about it. And when I see Bryan Danielson versus Alex Shelley in 2004 and they get 19 minutes, you like you were saying, you expect they could do better. I was expecting to see like this hidden gem, and it's just good to me. But I feel like it's a match where Bryan Danielson is one of my favorite, if not my favorite wrestler of all time. But if, everyone has flaws. And if there is a flaw with Danielson, is very occasionally some of his matches, like you can tell they're a lot. He loves to call stuff in the ring, which is normally great. But occasionally, sometimes stuff doesn't really hang together. Like it feels a little almost too called in the ring. Like your turn to decide to do what you want to do, and my turn. And I feel like this match, it doesn't really get cohesive in a way. Like there's something that feels just a little bit off until about halfway through. And that's when you talked about, and I completely agree with you about, like the best part of this match is like that point starting in the middle where Daniels is just like, I'm going to dissect this Alex Shelley. Like I'm going to destroy his arm. I'm going to stretch him. I'm going to do moves over and over. And I think in my notes, I wrote something like, this match is never better than when Danielson is just stretching the hell out of Alex Shelley, and Alex Shelley's like begging off. Like that's fantastic. And like you said, I could watch that all day. Like Danielson is the kind of guy where so many wrestlers, they have the worst part of their wrestling is like when they're just in control for an extended stretch, like, and making that interesting. That's like one of Danielson's strengths. It's a pleasure to watch him just in control, just grinding a guy down. It's so fun. Another little problem I had with the match was I thought all of Danielson's arm work was really good, and of course it plays into the finish. I felt like Shelley worked on Danielson's leg a little bit, almost enough that the announcers call attention to it. But then like late in the match, it doesn't really work out. And granted, going by Dame's suggestion, since he didn't do the leg that much, I'm not
Go to the wiki if you don't remember what that means.
Dame's suggestion lets me know that since he didn't work on the leg that long, I shouldn't really be that upset that they didn't really focus on it much going forward, because they didn't ask you to devote too much of my time to it. But it is one of those things where, especially where Shelley, like when Shelley's hitting his big moves at the end, he's hitting the shell shock, he's doing the border city stretch multiple times, and there are things that they don't really play into what he was doing earlier, because those moves don't touch the legs at all. But definitely, like you said, I felt like these two could have a better match. and it's a match I really want to see. I really want to see a great, and I think another thing that maybe hurts this match, like, again, it's a good match. I feel like I'm not being as fair to it as I should be because my expectations were too high, because I do agree with a lot of what you said. But I think another thing is, unfortunately for Shelley, Danielson had just wrestled Austin Aries multiple times in legit great matches. And because Shelley and Aries are the top two guys in that stable, I think your mind naturally compares them, which is really unfair, especially because one of those matches was incredibly long. But it is one of those things. It is an interesting thing to see where Shelley is in the booking, where technically he's the leader of Generation Next, yet Aries is the guy who gets to beat Danielson. Shelley doesn't, and
Also, those are main events, and this is a mid-card match.
Exactly. So even though technically Shelley's higher on the totem pole in kayfabe, quote unquote, he's not really in stuff like this treated like that.
Right. You could already tell by this point who Gabe's favorite was in Generation Next, even though Shelley does get a lot of mic time and get a lot of attention. I see what your point about this match. As far as I could go, there were really no flaws in this match that really got to me. The only reason I wouldn't go full, great with this match is because I don't think they were going for that. They worked this match like a good mid-card match, and to me, that's what it was. If they had wrestled the main event, I think they would have done more, and I think it would have been more epic.
This is one of those matches where if two other guys did it, I'd probably have a more positive sounding review, even though it would be the exact same match, just because I know, like you said, that these guys can do better. Like they're good enough that your expectation for where these guys top out at is much higher than this.
I've even seen a better match between the two of them.
Yeah. So, it's also interesting. Shelley came into the match selling his arm, like when he came down, even in his ring entrance. And Gabe on commentary said that it's from when he was running away from Mick Foley, he banged his arm on the entranceway. Which I don't know if that's a true thing or not. But it's funny because I don't think we ever saw that when it happened. And also, it's funny because normally when a guy gets hurt, you want to give credit to somebody to kind of put them over, and instead they just were legit like, yeah, he banged his arm when he was running away from somebody. So that's why it's hurt. And there was another moment, Matt, I don't know if you noticed this, where Danielson lifts Shelley up to like sit him down the top turnbuckle for a move. And you can tell Danielson's not doing this on purpose, but Shelley lands down on the buckle hard on his crotch. And you can hear a couple fans go, ouch, like that kind of male sympathy. And I don't think Shelley was seriously hurt. Another interesting thing is if you're like a Danielson super fan like we are, I feel like this was kind of like a moment in time for Danielson where Danielson talked about how he would always get bored with his personal appearance, and he was constantly changing even his wrestling style. And this match felt like, to me, at least in Ring of Honor, like the start of a new version of Danielson, where he comes out in the black and maroon, like Star Wars type robe. He's got the maroon trunks, which I always remember really vividly. He does it's one of the first times in Ring of Honor he does like the surfboard where he's constantly teasing, where he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And he's doing that. And this isn't the first time in Ring of Honor he did the airplane spin, but it's one of the early times. And it's so interesting to see those two spots, because those are spots that would become like some of Danielson's most crowd pleasing moves, where the crowd would like chant along or cheer for them. And in this match, they don't get much of a reaction because the crowd doesn't really know yet. Like, they haven't seen them enough times to really get hooked on them. So it's like a really interesting moment in his career, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a transitional. Danielson's been good about reinventing himself, different points, and this is one of them. It's a subtle reinvention, but it's there.
And this is also, I guess we should mention, this is the moment on the show where you can start to hear during the matches loud music in the background, and because the Rexplex was a big recreation center that had room for more than one thing at a time, and during the show they had a concert. In fact, Gabe in a later match says he actually apologized. I believe it's during Joe Doug Williams. He apologizes for the sound because he says there's some crazy hippie show happening at the same time, and Punk's is saying I think it's a revival, which kind of funny in the wake of where we are now in wrestling, but it's for the rest of the show, from basically, I would say around this match, during different matches, you can hear loud music, which was just, it's a reminder that Ring of Honor is an independent wrestling company, and things like this happened.
Gabe just doesn't like hippies. What can you say?
After the match, Danielson got a big standing ovation. Bryan wants a handshake, which Shelley refused him before the match. Shelley refuses now after the match. He goes to leave the ring, but then he comes back in and he teases that he's going to shake the hand. He gets within inches of it before he backs out again of the ring to booze. Danielson goes to follow him out of the ring, so Shelley grabs a chair. Shelley slides it in the ring. Danielson kicks it out of the ring immediately, which gets laughs from the crowd. Shelley teases.
I was going to say, I thought Shelley felt like a star here. Like, he was really good at working the crowd. I almost thought he had, MJF vibes.
Shelley, to me, I've said this before, but he is never better than when he's a chicken shit kind of goofy heel. He is so good at being kind of the heel that gets his just desserts almost immediately after he does something. The way he slides the chair in, and then Danielson immediately kicks the chair right back out. What did you expect? And the way Shelley reacts, he's just so good at that stuff.
Yeah, he was very, very, very good here. I don't know if he ever reached this level as a character ever again, honestly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess someone that's maybe more a TNA fan might, because I know that some of his more of his character work is probably there than anywhere else.
He definitely did good stuff with Kevin Nash and with the later maybe 05 or 06 for sure.
So Shelley teases shaking Danielson's hand a third time. He leaves the ring yet again. They really do this for a while. Danielson gets on the mic and he calls Generation Next a bunch of sore losers, and he reminds them that he served Jack Evans on a recent show, which was cute. Bryan says the Ring of Honor World Champion is dodging him, and he's waiting for him. But there's one more person coming to Ring of Honor that he wants to challenge. And before he even says it, a few fans start chanting Liger's name. They know what's coming. And Danielson says the match he and the crowd wants is him versus Jushin Liger. That gets a pop from the crowd, and then Danielson leaves. So throw out the official challenge, which we will get to see, Danielson versus Liger. It is coming. So that's that. That brings us to the Pure title match, the Ring of Honor Pure title. John Walters defeated Nigel McGuinness via submission in 16 minutes, 13 seconds, using a cross-arm stranglehold with body scissors. Matt, I was surprised how much I like this match. This was easily, for me, up to this point in the show, the best match on the show. One of John Walters' better matches up to this point. I would say this is outright very good, 3 3/4, close to 4-star, really good match, just bordering on great. And one of the interesting things I think about this match is it doesn't feel much like a Pure Wrestling title match. There's a bit of mat work, but there's a bit of everything in this match. It just feels like a normal 2004 indie wrestling match. And they both get to 2 rope breaks, but neither of them uses all 3. The finish doesn't play into the Pure rules at all. There's no real countout teases or anything like that. It's just 2 guys. It just happens to be a Pure title match, but it's just 2 guys where sometimes in the match, not every moment, but some moments, it almost feels like they're trying to steal the show and have that match of the year contender that will make them stars in one night. Especially late where Nigel comes off the top turnbuckle all the way to the floor on Walters. They're really pulling out some stops here, but just a good action-packed, kind of regular for the era. This kind of match, the way it's worked with a little bit of strikes, a little bit of mat work, big moves. This is kind of what I think of when I think of just what's the generic style of indie wrestling at this point in history, but a good example of it. I like the early stuff where they're trading wrist locks back and forth, where they're not doing it to make you think they're both working over each other's wrist. It's more just I want to prove I'm a better wrestler than you, so I can get out of this and you're going to put me right back in it, but then you're going to get out of, back. It's just who they're showing off who can be the better wrestler. I like the near fall stuff. Just all the bigger moves at the end. At this point, Nigel McGuinness has all his offense established, except the only thing is the rebound lariat. We haven't seen that yet, but the Tower of London gets the big pops. He's doing all his British stuff. It's just, yeah, this is kind of when I was watching Shelley and Danielson, hoping that would be a hidden gem. This was the hidden gem I was expecting that match to be. I like this quite a bit. But am I crazy, Matt?
No, you're not crazy, although I do think that I personally enjoyed Shelley versus Danielson more. But I thought this match was on a similar level to it. I thought this was a big moment for Nigel. It was really his first big singles match, wouldn't you say? He's had other singles matches. He even had a match where he did the head bump spot. But this is a title match in a major position that gets real time, and he has not had that yet before.
And that match, that promo he did earlier, where he said, like, this is my first match as like a full timer that gets booked on every show. That's true. Like that's absolutely a real thing. So I'm sure he really was like aware of how big a match this was for him.
And he was trying to really show what he could do. He worked really hard here. And, there was nothing so unique about the early work. They were exchanging holds. I will say I was surprised at how up the crowd was for this. I did not expect them to be so into this match, but they really were. They were really, really into it. And, they
were more into this than Aries CM Punk.
Oh my God. But
yeah,
like 100 times more into this than Aries CM Punk. I feel like the story was that early in the match, they were trying to show that Nigel and Walters were very even, right? Like they were, Punk even says at one point that Nigel was winning it hands down. And he says that, like, because Joe called Walters a paper champion, that was almost like weighing too heavily on Walters' mind and distracted him. Nigel's was almost like no-selling at one point some of the big chops. Nigel actually does not no-sell a big forearm because that knocks him down, but he was no-selling some chops. And you know how in matches they do, like, the whole, like, roll-up reversal where they go from one roll-up into another? Well, this match had a spot where they do it, but they just do the same roll-up back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that was fun. You don't see that very often, where they just go into one guy has the roll-up, the other guy has the roll-up. And it's not like a million different styles. It's just the same roll-up over and over again. I like that. But at one point, Nigel actually is the victim of a big lariat by Walters. And you don't see Nigel being the victim of a lariat too often. Walters actually, is trying to, like, do some new stuff. He actually is working this match like he's a little bit of a bigger star than usual. At one point after his, like, top rope Rana, he does, like, this firing up, like, stomp thing before he hits his big lariat. Like almost like he's trying to get into some signature spots that the crowd gets into. And at least on this night, it's kind of working. Walters is definitely being more intense. He's not being like a heel. But I would say he's working a bit more sadistically, which I think plays in, which works because Nigel is very popular here. So I think that actually, like at one point when Walters looks like he's going for the surfboard, instead he kind of just like pulls at Nigel's nose and his mouth, like just stuff like that, like just like a viciousness to him. Nothing, no eye poke, so he's not a heel. But
did you notice that like he made a couple times he made Nigel give the crowd the finger, like he manipulated his hand into giving the middle finger, and I think one time like I don't think like either Gabe or Punk didn't realize what he was doing, or like he was like Nigel's giving the crowd the finger, and they were acting like Nigel was doing it willingly, but it was like Walter's literally pushing his fingers and pulling up the middle finger.
Yeah, no, I don't remember seeing that, but I like that's like good subtle stuff, I think. Nigel actually hits like a big cross body to the outside near the late in the match, and I feel like that's the sort of spot that makes a match seem bigger than it otherwise would. You don't usually see that from Nigel, even like as a main eventer. And then at the end, going to, Walter's aggressiveness, he hits a cross-arm lung blower, then another, then does like a body scissors necktie combo for the win, and Nigel gives up, and it's just like, Walters is being very aggressive. The one thing I would say is, I think if this was a main event, they would have gone a few more minutes and done a few more false finishes, and you would have gotten to like a really, really high level. I don't think they were going for that here. I think it's sort of two things. One is, it's not a main event, but also two, after all the evenness, they wanted to have Walters get a kind of a dominant win because they needed to, get him over as a dominant champion. And I thought that worked pretty well. So I thought even though the ending, made the match maybe less good than it could have been, although it was still really good, I think it was worth it because you want to get Walters over as a strong champion. And I would say, I know you didn't like the Walters-Williams match that much, but I thought it was really good. I thought this match was really good, and I think Walters is on a hell of a run here.
Yeah, it's interesting too, though, because when you look like this match is a really great way to gauge where these two guys are at, and like overness wise at this point in their careers. And like I was kind of surprised where I would say the crowd was like at least 60-40 for Nigel in this match. When again, he's the guy where he hasn't been a regular. He's been, like semi there, not in any real big matches. And Walters has had pushes that it hasn't been, we talked about in the last show, it wasn't consistent. He's kind of getting re-pushed now after some time being kind of lost in terms of focus from the booking, but like Nigel already feels more popular, at least on this night, than John Walters, who's supposed to be their pure champ, which I was a little shocked by how much more. And
well, I don't know if Walters though was ever such a huge crowd favorite. You know what I mean? Like
no.
I don't know if they I don't know if they ever totally bought into loving John Walters outside of Boston maybe. So that's probably part of it too.
There is kind of a weird thing too where you're watching this and like clearly obviously Gabe wants the pure title to get over and be a new secondary title. And Walters, and he wants Walters to grow with it, probably like Joe grew with the world title. And we know it doesn't really work out. But it's kind of funny because you're watching this and you're watching this match, and he's wrestling the guy who's actually going to make the pure title mean something. Like just it's way before it actually happens. But it's so weird to watch that. It's like you kind of know your Gabe has the answer to his problem, but it's the wrong guy in the match. And I don't know if Nigel would have been ready for that at this point, or gone the heel way that really makes the pure title run so fun. But it is kind of an interesting thing to see.
I think it actually in the end probably worked out the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, I agree with you. You were talking too about like the commentary. I thought it was interesting. Punk really sold this match hard. Like at one point, Punk says that this was the match he was most looking forward to the entire night of any match on the card. He also outright predicts at one point that he thinks Nigel will win this match. Like you talked about how he was putting over Nigel. He outright like goes like, I think Nigel's going to beat John Walters. And Punk, Gabe does those predictions. Punk doesn't do those predictions all the time. And there was one kind of goofy spot where Nigel throws a back elbow, and from the camera angle, we can see it clearly doesn't come close to a Walters' head, and Walters sells it anyway, like, oh, you got me right in the face, I'm covering up my face, which is like one of the only execution problems I would say on this match. And finally, I would just want to ask you, Matt, a question I thought of when I was watching this match, which is, I just want to say, the end with the stranglehold where he does the John Walters does the lung blowers with the stranglehold multiple times and he never lets go of the stranglehold, and then he just ends it with the bi scissors and the stranglehold. I actually thought that was so much cooler than just a lung blower. Like that should have been his finish. I thought that was just a really cool finish. But I was watching this match and noticing that like a lot of times the announcers would play into the idea of, oh, he's covering him or doing the submission right near the ropes on purpose to make him to use up his rope breaks. And I started thinking, is that a smart strategy? Or is that kind of like, isn't it still smarter to just try, if you don't have to pin or put a guy in a hold in the middle of the ring? Like,
I think, if you follow the classic wrestling logic, which is you got to wear the guy down first before the hold works, then it sort of makes sense to just get the rope breaks out of the way early. You know what I mean? If you think in a more MMA way, which is like a good submission will end a match no matter when you get it on, then I think your logic makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how I felt, so I wanted a second opinion on this, but that helps calm my nerves, Matt, because this was the thing that was keeping me up at night lately.
This is the big problem that we have to solve in this generation. Actually, then on the next episode, we're going to spend a half hour talking about this problem.
And then that's going to come right after the 2 hours we spend talking about portable Visa credit card machines.
That's right.
Got to a promo backstage somewhere else, presumably in a completely different building, because this promo is Jim Cornette making his, I guess in a way, his Ring of Honor return, even though he's not in the building. So in a way, you might not want to count it. But he's in a classic Cornette suit. He's got his tennis racket. Jim says neither he nor Ring of Honor were happy about the way he left the company. He mentions the Briscoes firing him, which is how they wrote him out before. And he says he wanted to find a tag team to teach the Briscoes a lesson. But then he learned that the Briscoes are on suspension. Cornette says he's going to reunite the greatest tag team in the history of wrestling because for the first time ever, it's going to be Dennis Condrey, Bobby Eaton, and Stan Lane all side by side together. It's going to be in Philadelphia for Ring of Honor. So he's plugging that future thing. And this was, again, Cornette's return to Ring of Honor. One thing that was interesting about this, Matt, was I feel at this time they were still kind of pushing the Briscoes feud. Like we've talked about how the Briscoes run in Ring of Honor for the next couple of years or whatever is over, but at the time Ring of Honor didn't know it, and I guess they still probably didn't know because of the news wires I was able to pull up during this time, there's one thing plugging the next show, which is the Midnight Express reunion show, which was like Gabe was writing something like, how will the Briscoes react to Cornette being in the building and celebrating another tag team? So it definitely felt like probably if the Briscoes didn't get hurt or weren't on their way out, the plan was probably to have some kind of confrontation. Probably they would get beat down by the Midnight Express, like on the next show.
Yeah, or they would beat down the Midnight Express. But yeah, no, probably they would, because the Briscoes were not heels,
Yeah.
So unless they were planning on a match, I mean, I guess Bobby Eaton was still wrestling at this point, but I don't know if the other guys were. Yeah, I don't know what would have happened, but that's interesting. Yeah, maybe Gabe can tell us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting also just because it's weird because Cornette, it's another one of those things where you don't know who's supposed to be a face or a heel, but I assume on the night that's built around celebrating the Midnight Express, on that night, the Midnight Express were not supposed to be heels, probably.
Well, they were definitely the faces here. Maybe what would have happened would be a reunion between Cornette and the Briscoes as baby faces.
Just a big hug and an apology for a firing. Yeah. Finally, a feel-good wrestling storyline.
Exactly.
Where everyone just works out with words and not fists.
Exactly.
But we go next to the semi-main event, a Ring of Honor World Title match. Samoa Joe successfully defends the title yet again. He defeats Doug Williams via pinfall in 17 minutes, 54 seconds after he hits a lariat. This is a rematch, Matt, from Round Robin Challenge 2 in 2003, which is a match that was not, I don't think either of us thought was bad, but we were both disappointed based on how big of fans we were of both guys. I believe Joe, even in the shoot interview he did for Ring of Honor in 2004, even said that this was, at this point in his career, one of his biggest disappointments, that he and Doug couldn't have had a better match, in 2003. So how do you feel like, I mean, I don't know if it's been so long, if you can remember the details on this match, but just knowing that we weren't insanely in love with this match, how do you feel this one compares?
I would say almost exactly the same. I thought Doug was really good. I was disappointed in Samoa Joe's performance in this match. Like, again, I thought the match was solid, but I thought Joe was very lethargic. He was taking a lot of time in between all of his moves, and he was just, every time Joe was in control, the match slowed down a lot. He grinds Doug down with arm bars and face locks, but he's just doing it very, very slow. He does some big spots. He does the ole ole kick, does an enziguri, but even Gabe at one point mentioned how Joe is just taking his time with follow-up moves. I just noticed a lot of Joe just kind of sitting around in this match. And I love Samoa Joe, and maybe this was on purpose. I don't know, but to me, it just felt like something was off. Doug comes back later with repeated uppercuts, goes for his running knee. Joe hit the snap power slam into the armbar. And I like the spot where Doug clasped his hands together to block the armbar. Joe, he went for a power bomb and tries to turn it into the STF, which he does, but Doug actually blocks it with his leg, and I've never seen anyone block that. I thought Doug was great. Joe blocked the Chaos Theory by holding onto the turnbuckle, and then, Doug gets Joe in a sleeper. And you don't usually see this spot in ROH where, Joe's arm drops twice but holds it up the third time. You don't see that. And then Joe gets his leg on the ropes. Also, Joe got Doug in a torture rack at one point, but Doug got out, right away. And there were some good near falls, a big lariat by Joe, got a good near fall. Doug actually kicked out of the Muscle Buster, which is freaking insane. I didn't even know that was possible. And then Joe just won with a bunch of slaps and lariats. So the end and the finish was okay. I really was not feeling Samoa Joe tonight, though. I thought the match was still solid. Joe's a good wrestler, even at not his best, and Doug is really good. So it's not like it was a bad match at all. But I was disappointed with it. I'll be honest.
Um, I thought this match was very good. I like this more than you. I thought it was right around. I thought it was at least on par with the last match, which I also liked a little more than you. But I agree that Joe, like, I think in these matches it's kind of common for Joe sometimes to um be a little lackadaisical at sometimes between moments. But I think it works for Joe because he's a big guy, and the way he's kind of this slow creeping menace at times. I think it works, but I do agree this match was on the extreme end of that, to the point where it was enough to be noticeable, like you said, where the commentary even called it out. I think I like this match just because it was something you don't see in Ring of Honor too often, which was it was kind of a Haas battle. Like, it was two big guys just hitting each other hard quite a bit in this match, and there was real weight behind that kind of stuff that they were doing. I agree with you that Doug Williams was really good in this match. Doug Williams did a couple like flip bumps in this match. Like, there's a moment where he takes I think a corner Uranagi. Yeah, where he does the move where Joe's in the corner and the guy runs towards him and Joe grabs him and does like the Uranagi. And Doug Williams does a full flip where he like lands on his stomach from it. Or, well, it looked like he landed on his head at first. And then later he takes another move where Joe sweeps his legs. And again, Doug Williams, which is a big guy, does like a forward flip bump and goes from standing on his feet to like flipping forward and landing on his ass. Like, Doug Williams, I think, was really trying to avenge that other match where maybe, like you said, Joe, maybe a little more tired for some reason. I like that Joe broke out the torture rack, like you mentioned. I like that even though technically Williams didn't do the exact same move, I like that he did the rear naked choke, which is kind of similar to Joe's choke. And he did the body scissors with it. And I wrote in my notes, if you like body scissors, this is the show for you, because this match had body scissors and the last match had body scissors at the finish and like a different body scissors spot in the middle of the match. So if you like men wrapping their legs around other men, there's a whole line of videos that's really appealing to you, but there's also this show, which is also good.
I have nothing to add.
There was a moment in commentary I want to say. Gabe says, if Joe wants to prove the world title is better than the pure title, there's no better way to prove that than by beating the former pure champ Doug Williams. And I wrote in my notes, I can think of one better way than beating the current pure champ. Like,
yes.
I do not think this was a great match, and it's one of those things where sometimes we watch matches like going to the Danielson Shelley match where we said, oh, this is not the best match these two could have, and you pointed out, you said, I've seen a better match these two have. I'm watching this match, since it's two times where these guys, which I think we both agree are great wrestlers, have not had a great match together. Maybe do you think this is just an example where two great guys that don't click together on a great level?
Definitely could be.
Yeah,
for
I'm
sure.
Not sure. I also thought, like you mentioned, the Muscle Buster kickout. I thought that was a little too much. I realized Doug Williams is the former pure champ, and it's in a way it's really nice because it's a sign that Joe really respects Doug Williams. But they had you said Matt that you didn't know that they could do that, but Homicide had just kicked out of the Muscle Buster in their final match like a couple shows ago.
Yeah, but like to me, like that's like the end of a feud. And it's Homicide, you know what I mean? Like that's sort of like a WrestleMania match, and you could do you can do anything at WrestleMania, but like in a run of the mill title defense, I don't know.
But yeah, I think actually that's kind of my point, which is you can't play that card too often, and it has to be really special. And while the Homicide one was special enough, it's like when you've just done that, and this isn't really a match on that level. It felt I don't think I would have had a second guy kick out of the Muscle Buster, much less like Doug Williams in a match that didn't have that much build up to it.
It's not even part of a rivalry. It's like a random like they chose my opponent for me match.
And also I love this because Matt, one of the things I hate most, like I really like doing this podcast with you. Obviously I've devoted countless hours to it, but one of the things I hate is when I do this podcast, and then I find a new tidbit about an old show, and I realize I can't put it in the show. So I get really mad. Like, I get mad at myself, and it's frustrating. But this is great. Gives me a great example to give a little tidbit to something I missed from Samoa Joe's 2004 shoot interview about an older match. Because, Matt, this match reminded me of that. Did you know that in the last match, Homicide versus Joe, their last match in 2004 against each other, that Joe says that entire finish, including Homicide kicking out of the Muscle Buster and everything that came out of it after it, was all thought of by Joe and Homicide on the fly as the match was happening. Like, Joe did not plan for him to kick out of the Muscle Buster, apparently. That was just something, like, in the match, he said, based on, like, the crowd and what we were doing, like, I just made it all up, like, in my head during the match, because I just felt like that's what we needed. And so part of me wonders almost if, like, Joe was doing that here, too. Like, a lot of times when a big movie gets kicked out, I assume, Gabe or someone must have told him. But I wonder if, like, Joe just took into his head, like, I like Doug. He's a big name. Like, I'm beating him. Let me let him kick out on the Muscle Buster.
I guess, sure. I mean, no reason to think that couldn't have happened.
Yeah. So anyway, I enjoyed this match. Joe really puts him over. But there's a couple of other things to talk about with this match, Matt. Well, maybe not even this match, but for some reason, this match sparked a couple of the big newsletter writers to talk about Doug Williams and British wrestling. So I got a couple of quotes that are interesting. The first one, Matt, that I think is the better one, actually, but I won't save it for last, is Wade Keller. Matt, let me read to you something that Wade Keller wrote. Samoa Joe versus Doug Williams has a real chance to be a show stealer. Williams is a Fit Finlay type wrestler in that he doesn't have a great physique, is low on traditional charisma, and doesn't do flashy high spots, but his European mat style is fascinating to watch. He also carries himself like a badass. Matt, I don't know if I agree with even half of what Wade said there.
I mean, I definitely agree that his European mat style is fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
That part I agree with.
Doesn't have a great physique. Like, Doug Williams is pretty goddamn muscular. He's built like a brick shithouse. Low on traditional charisma. I don't know if he's the most charismatic wrestler. I wouldn't call him, like, I could name 5 guys on the Ring of Honor roster off the top of my head with less charisma easily.
Yeah, he has charisma. He's not like The Rock, but he has charisma.
And even doesn't do flashy high spots. He does, like, top rope knee drops and the Chaos Theory German suplex. Like, I don't, like...
Sometimes you wonder if these guys are writing about people they haven't actually watched.
Yeah, sometimes especially when guys like Wade and Bruce talked about Ring of Honor, sometimes you get the impression that maybe they've watched like 5 Ring of Honor tapes and some of their opinions are based entirely just on, like, I've seen Doug Williams wrestle 3 matches. This is who Doug Williams is. Like,
probably not even 3.
Yeah. Then going to The Observer, Dave wrote in the wake of this match, the big thing now is the old British wrestling style, particularly Williams, Bryan Danielson, and Nigel McGuinness. That's the new thing in the Northeastern Indies that everyone is copying, because what's old is new again. Everyone has seen so much of the lucha and hardcore that nobody really cares about it. It's more stiff Japanese and British. John Walters kept the pure title, beating McGuinness via submission in a good technical match. I just saw a tape from about 6 weeks back, and the British stuff with McGuinness versus Doug Williams is great. So yeah, that was another thing that reminded me of the moment we were in, where this was around the time in wrestling. Like, I believe going on something you said a show or two ago, I confirmed like Colt Cabana is going on a tour of Britain, like very shortly after this, or maybe even during this time. And like, this is the time with him and Chris Hero and a lot of these guys where all of a sudden, like, British influence is big on the indies for like a good 6 months to a year.
Yeah, it was definitely, I mean, all through 2005 too, it was still a trend, to the point where at one point at a show in 2005, there's a European rounds match between Nigel McGuinness and Colt Cabana. Doesn't go that well, but they do have it. And so, yeah, the British style is definitely all the rage in 2004, 2005. I don't know. I like it. I still like it.
Yeah, I still do too. But it's always funny when, like, I feel like wrestling's so much more homogenous. You don't get as much in this, but this, you would definitely see like, oh, like everyone that stayed over at Chris Hero's house must have started watching his Johnny Saint tapes, because all of a sudden, like, 5 guys are doing cravats on every show, you know, like,
yes,
that kind of thing. So after the match, Williams really sells, struggling to get to his feet. And even when he shakes Joe's hand, he collapses in his arms. Like, Williams was really selling, like, big after this match, like how badly Joe had kicked his ass. Which, again, like, clearly both these guys really respected each other and were trying really hard to put each other over. And that leaves us with the main event. The Ring of Honor Tag Team Title 4-Way Elimination Ultimate Endurance match. In case people forgot, the Ultimate Endurance was a 4-team elimination tag match where every fall had a different stip. The first fall would always be a submission match. The second fall would be a scramble match. And the third fall would be the vague and nebulous anything goes match. In this match tonight, the main event, the Havana Pitbulls of Ricky Reyes and Rocky Romero, the champs, defeated BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff, Generation Next of Jack Evans and Roderick Strong, and the Carnage Crew DeVito and Loke in 20 minutes, 25 seconds. The eliminations are as follows. In the submission-only first fall, BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff eliminated the Carnage Crew in 11-17 when Moff and Whitmer made DeVito tap out to like a double-team Boston Crab where they each held a leg. In the second fall, Scramble Rules, BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff eliminated Generation Next of Jack Evans and Roderick Strong in 13-46 when Moff pinned Evans after he hit him with a burning hammer. And then the final fall, Anything Goes. The Havana Pitbulls defeated BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff in 20-25 when Romero pinned Whitmer after hitting a jumping knee strike. Matt, I was shocked at how much I liked this match too. I thought this might have been my match of the show. I might just go 4 stars. Like,
wow, 4.
I really like this. I was surprised how much I liked the first 2 falls, which I guess is basically the first 2/3 of the match. I felt like everyone was working, knowing it was the main event and trying to live up to that. And I felt the match was like it was never like a huge thrill a minute crazy moves every second in the first 2 falls necessarily, but there was always something interesting happening in front of you. It was a lot of guys coming in and out, and you could just tell everyone had their working boots on, except maybe coincidentally my favorite part of the match was the part of the match where the Havana Pitbulls weren't in it very much, which we can talk about that more in a little bit. I thought in particular, the Roderick Strong Dan Moff sequences were really cool because they just go to town like beating each other up. And I feel like Dan Moff, I've learned from doing the rewatch, is Dan Moff is at his best whenever he faces someone that kind of puts him in a position to just be like a really intense brawl. And I felt like here, I really came away from this wanting to see Strong and Moff just beat the living crap out of each other.
Also, at one point, Moff actually was like manhandling Strong and making Strong's chops look weak almost. And you almost never see Strong look in that position. Almost never. And that was unique and interesting.
Yeah, it was a really cool, memorable part of the match. The third fall for me, it isn't as good as the first 2 falls. It's not bad, but I would describe it as the match kind of stutters a little bit at that point. The Pitbulls wrestle like they always wrestle, and that's becoming more of a trend here. On rewatch, the Pitbulls run here isn't that great. Like they feel kind of mechanical, and it feels like they only know how to do the same basic kind of mix of the same submissions, the same strikes. They do a couple cool double teams here, and I guess it didn't really affect how good the match was. But if you expected something different, this match, the 3 falls, the way the steps work are kind of goofy because in the submission, in one of the first 2 falls, there's a chair shot, and Gabe even points out like, "Oh, that shouldn't be it's not the anything goes fall," and it's just allowed. And then the second fall, which is the scramble fall match, it only lasts like a minute or 2, and it doesn't feel different than any other part of the match. And then the third fall, which is the anything goes fall match, is basically just a regular tag match.
Yeah, actually, until you said it just now, I didn't even realize that the third fall was anything goes. I thought it was just a regular tag team title match.
There's no weapons in the third fall.
Yeah. I actually had no idea that was even supposed to be anything goes.
Yeah, so to me, in terms of just in watching the match, it didn't affect my enjoyment. But if you sit down and think about it, they didn't really work to the falls. Even the first fall, there wasn't many submission teases until the very end. Not that I am complaining. There was like 1 or 2. It made the steps of the match felt meaningless. It felt like the wrestlers barely cared what the steps of the match were. I still like this match quite a bit, and I also fear, though, that just like I'm worried that the Danielson Shelley match, I'm a little too hard on it because my expectations were so high. I'm worried that maybe I'm slightly overrating this match because my expectations were, I can't believe this is the main event, and I felt like at least in that respect, it over-delivered. Based on who's in this and the spot on the card, I was entertained the whole way through.
Speak your truth, Trevor. That's what I would say. Don't worry about whether you over or underrated it. I agree with a lot of what you said. I definitely didn't like the match as much as you. I liked the first fall a lot. Although, immediately, if these ultimate endurances are really like one size fits all, this is always what the stipulations are. Yeah, I think this is a bad mix of guys to have a tap out match, which is what they called the first round. They didn't even say submission. They said tap out match. And like, these are not the guys that you want to see. These are not the teams that you want to see a tap out match for, right? Honestly, the concept of a tag team submission match feels ridiculous to me in the first place. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I think that's especially when you consider in these Ultimate Endurance ones, it was the first fall, and the problem with submissions is like, there's just something weird about like a bunch of guys watching another guy in a submission hold.
Yeah,
like it just seems weird.
Exactly. But, I brought up like some of the highlights of the fall already, which I thought was like Moff making Strong look weak and that stuff. I did like, BJ Whitmer. There was a heat spot with him where basically everybody gets to beat up BJ Whitmer. Even Evans gets to do like some of his wacky kicks on BJ. And Roderick Strong actually tries to do a submission on BJ with a necktie. Of course, Moff breaks it up like immediately. There was one cool spot where Roderick does like a wheelbarrow onto Evans and flips him onto Whitmer. That was good. So eventually, I guess BJ and Whitmer and Moff are like the de facto faces. Like, keep in mind, they have not been really faces for very long.
Yeah.
But
it's because of the Foley feud.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Carnage Crew are technically faces, but they're feuding with the other faces. So it's like, that's confusing. Obviously, the Pitbulls and the Generation Next are heels. I'd say Whitmer, after he does an exploder onto Loki, he gets like, what I would call a warm tag to Moff. They didn't really build up enough drama for it to be a truly hot tag. But, I like that. Then Moff came in, House of Fire, hurled Evans onto Strong and DeVito, and the crowd chanted, "Ole, ole, ole," for some reason when that happened. I don't know if they thought Joe was going to come out. But I like that, Loke kind of gets like a front face lock choke, and Moff tries hard to break it up, but Loke just like flicks it away. Like Moff basically has a chair basically, and he throws it at Loke. Loke just throws the chair behind him, so Moff has to hit him again in the head really hard, and this time it does break it up. I don't know if that was planned or if Loke just decided, that hair chair shot didn't look good enough. He has to do another one. But if I was a wrestler, I probably would not be like, you know what? I should get hit in the head with a chair again. The
second one was hard. I believe Punk called it like one of the hardest chair shots he'd ever seen.
Yeah,
it's brutal.
I know, it's crazy. Yeah. Moff and Whitmer they actually hit like almost a concerto on DeVito's knees, because remember, DeVito has a bad knee from earlier. They kind of play that in. And then they hit the double Boston Crab on DeVito for the tap out. And Gabe says he's never seen DeVito tap before. And probably not, although I am not keeping track of how DeVito loses matches.
You can say a lot of things about DeVito, and I will just take I will just take your word for it.
Yeah,
I'm not saying. You can tell me like that's the 18th time he submitted from. I'll be like,
yeah,
okay.
Exactly. I believe it. But like you said, I thought that was the best fall, but they were barely any submissions. It was mostly just a brawl. I was actually pretty disappointed in the scramble because it was just so short. Like, I thought, okay, this is when Evans is going to get to really shine. This is when Strong and the Pitbulls are going to get to have some good stuff. But they didn't really even do a full scramble. I guess they were rushing maybe because of the curfew. But like Strong got his backbreaker and a half Nelson suplex. The Pitbulls double team Moff, but Evans hits like a springboard drop kick and then goes for a springboard 450 to the floor. But Moff and Whitmer both move away, and Evans just like splats on the floor, and so Moff can hit the burning hammer. And then basically what you said with the regular match, it's just the Pitbulls kind of being the Pitbulls. Rocky at one point takes Moff to the outside and just like puts him in a headlock and walks him basically all around the ring. which is a spot that I always hate. You know, that was like WWF Attitude Era brawling, where you got a guy in a headlock and you just like walk him down the rampway. You know, and it's just like,
Yeah.
you can do that for like a few couple feet, but when you're walking with somebody in your headlock for like a really long time and it doesn't even look like an intense headlock or that you're struggling, to me that seems silly, especially because the payoff was just he threw Moff into the guardrail. Like,
It's a spot that literally only entertains the front row.
exactly. And it just looks corny. I don't know. But you know, Reyes does some rolling German suplexes to BJ, and BJ takes like some very enthusiastic bumps. Like he is just like jumping like as high as he can. He's like I almost imagine him going wee every time he does gets German suplexed. Yeah, the Pitbulls, they hit the double guillotine knee on BJ. Moff makes the save. Gabe actually says that Smokes was dumped with a huge backdrop on the floor by Moff, but we don't see it. Which I almost am like, if we miss a spot like that, you might as well just not mention it. Like, I don't know, did we see that spot and I just missed it?
I was going to mention that is a huge part, actually a flaw in this match, which is Moff and Reyes, the whole finish of the match is Romero and Whitmer having like an extended like striking battle, and that Romero wins with the jumping high knee, and then he gets the win. But during that whole time, Moff and Reyes are having a brawl on the floor that takes them both out of the match. We don't see it, and multiple times Gabe's like, Moff just backdropped Julius Smokes, and you hear spots like, Moff's just been taken out or whatever, and you don't see any of it, like not even in the background.
Yeah, it's weird, and like they do have multiple cameras, so I don't know what the deal is with that. But I honestly do think they probably should have just not even mentioned Smokes if they were going to do that. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but it was weird. I did like that they did an homage to the First Glory by Honor, because there was a slap exchange with Romero and BJ where Whitmer takes off his pads. Like, because if you remember, there was a big spot in that match where they take off their pads, they take off their wrist tape, and they just beat the crap out of each other. I will say this. BJ's strikes do not look as cool as Cho's or Loki's or Rocky Romero's, I'll be honest. But BJ did get a couple of actually surprisingly big, like, near-fall pops. He got a surprise roll-up on Romero, and the crowd really bought that. Then he hit an exploder.
How loud that was.
Yeah, it was crazy. Then he hit us exploder, which also the crowd bought pretty well. But after that whole strike exchange, Romero just took him down with a big kick and a knee to the head and got the win that way. I feel like maybe the Pitbulls need a more exciting finish. I don't know. But the crowd really booed the win. They really wanted Moff and Whitmer to win. But I will say I did enjoy that match more than the first Ultimate Endurance. I didn't like it as much as you, but it was a good match. I thought it had direction. I thought it was tight. I thought it was all action. So I can't complain too much. It was good. That's how I would say. It was a good way to end the show.
I don't remember Moff and Whitmer being this hugely over tag team, but it felt like on this night, if they had won, like the crowd would have been pretty excited to see it.
This might have been their most overnight as baby faces, honestly.
So it's kind of sad that they kind of missed their window here. Not that I think they would have been on like a huge run if they won on this night, but this probably was the night if you really were wanting to push them as the champs. In hindsight, this probably was the night to do it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that before the match, but when you watch the match and you just listen to the crowd, you're like, oh, they're ready for this. They want this.
Especially when you're positioning Moff as the big American hero.
Yeah, and he's about to be part of this feud with Foley where they'll be doing tag matches as like the surrogates for Foley and Steamboat and things like that. Like,
yeah,
why not put the belts on? But, yeah, just looking over at my notes, I thought Evans, for the time he was in, he just did so much crazy Evans stuff, like the Beal throw where Moff throws him over the top rope into the crowd of wrestlers. I thought was an awesome spot. Evans does a willing crash and burn spot where he does a big dive to the floor that Moff and Whitmer just avoid, and it's like on purpose. So Evans is just like, yeah, I'll do this. I'm willing to do this. He's fucking insane. And of course he takes the burning hammer. I even liked, it's the little things with Jack Evans. I love there's a point where someone blind tags Jack Evans. Like he's not seeing it. He's not looking at the guy, and the guy slaps Evans on the back to tag him in. And Evans like sells that he's in pain from the blind tag. And it's like, I fucking love Jack Evans. He's so cool. And then near the end, Moth does his big tope on Reyes, and he basically overshoots Reyes and basically crash and burns in a respect that isn't like on purpose. And this wouldn't surprise me if this was a match where people got legit like busted up a bit and hurt on, especially when you consider again this was a hardwood floor with no real coverings on. So after the match, Allison Danger runs to ringside again, and she grabs the mic. She begs the Havana Pitbulls to finish the job on Moth and Whitmer. She says she has money. She'll pay them to do it. The Pitbulls and Smokes continue their beat down as the crowd chants for Foley, so they already see where this is going. The Embassy and Generation Next run back into the ring to also put their boots to Moth and Whitmer, getting revenge for Moth and Whitmer running them all off earlier. Finally, Foley comes out to the ring with a fire extinguisher, filling the ring with all the fire extinguisher smoke, powder, whatever it is. Gabe says it's a tribute to the firemen on September 11th, which kind of made me cringe. Moth and Whitmer recover after this. All the smoke clears. Literally, they make a comeback. They clean house as Foley cheers them on and kind of directs traffic. Foley then gives Rave a low blow, which gets revenge for earlier in the night, and then he hits him with a double arm DVT, which, Matt, to show you how like bad my memory and how long ago the show was, I was like, oh, Mick Foley can't do spots anymore, but I realized, oh, it's 2004. But it was like a surprise to see, like, oh, he was still able to leave his feet, and it didn't take him an hour to get to his feet because he wasn't completely crippled in his life by this point.
Right. He had like a really, really amazing match of the year candidate against Randy Orton just that same year.
Yeah.
Where he did a big jump off a rampway.
Yeah. That was, legit one of the best matches of Foley's career even, and definitely, in my opinion, the best match Randy Orton to this day has ever had. But
I'd have to think about it, but probably. I will say what's interesting is they really put Whitmer and Moth over a lot here. Multiple times on the show, they ran off like lots of guys. Like even that first time that Foley came out, like they like basically ran off like a ton of people as they were attacking and stuff. It's like just
they ran off two stables by themselves.
Yeah, I almost was like, why is everyone leaving? It's just two guys, but hey, just two guys and they're having a good time.
That's a great reference. I know that reference.
Yeah.
Guy number one. But this was a good. This is the kind of ending where it's just like the kind of crowd pleasing. It's not gonna hype you up super for the next show, but it's just that kind of, and it's classic Gabe where Gabe's good about like you start an angle on a show and you kind of tie it up at the end. So like the full circle thing of Jimmy Rave gets the low blow early in the show and then Foley gets his revenge right at the very end. Like it's just that very simple but satisfying kind of, we set something up and then we immediately within the show pay it off little story.
Exactly.
So there's a part though that Matt that didn't make tape, and we'll go to a PW Insider Mike Johnson's live report. Mike Johnson writes, Foley said that he had this is something that didn't make tape. Foley said that he had an admission to make. This is something he said after that segment we just described, and that was he didn't do anything tonight. He asked the fans to give a big round of applause for everyone who worked the show, and the fans chanted Ring of Honor. They played Foley's old theme music, Born to be Wild, to close the show. Mike Johnson writes, a fun ending. I love, like, Mick Foley is basically, in some ways, the wrestler version of us, where his way of giving compliments to other people is to put himself down. Because I like earlier in the show, he was basically, his whole way of putting over Ring of Honor was to say that, like, these guys are giving it all the way I wasn't doing in WWE. And now, even here at the end, he's like, I have to remind you guys that, like, Ashley didn't really do anything in terms of work tonight. Like, it's just very Foley to do things that way. Classic
endearing self-deprecation, as opposed to our version, which is just annoying and self-pitying.
Exactly.
You see what I did there?
That's our way of putting it. Nah, that put that on the best of Through the Years. I almost spoiled it by explaining it when it's obvious, but like, that is the best. Okay. I also wanted to mention while I'm at it, anyone who's editing the non-existent Through the Years wiki, add next to the Trevor Dame's the Dame suggestion.
The Dame suggestion.
Add earlier Matt's the entry for Matt's warm tag. because that's a good one too. So we cut to Special K backstage.
Warm tag sounds disgusting.
Yeah. Cut to Special K backstage. Lacey tells everyone to shut up. They're all talking and arguing. She's pissed that they let Dunn and Marcos call her a hoe earlier and that they lost their match. Lacey tells them to defend her honor and kick their asses right now. Dixie says they need to just let those guys chill out. And most of the Special K leave with Lacey. They don't agree with Dixie. And they leave with Lacey, except for Becky, Dixie, and Angel Dust. So the battle lines in the big Special K intra-group war continuing to be set.
I also should notice that Derange was part of the Special K crew, and we have not seen Derange in a while. Have we seen him even since the Scramble Cage back in March?
I don't think so. He had that little falling out, and then he came back where they said, oh, he'll never work there again. And then he came back for Scramble Cage, and then I think he's been gone again, hasn't he? Yeah.
So Derange is back. On the heel side of Special K, the Lacey side. Lacey's Angels, if you will.
We cut to somewhere else backstage where we see a close-up of a brutal, big, long red abrasion on Alex Shelley's shoulder. At first, I almost thought it was like a cut. It's followed by the camera pans, and we see the red, roughed-up chests of the other three members of Generation Next.
I gotta say, there was something about this that just seemed different from most wrestling promos in the way it was framed. Something, I don't know, just like a long, slow pan of a bunch of young men's chests. Listen, I'm not saying it's bad or good or anything. It just is.
Careful, Matt. You're going to throw all the good work we made at the top of the show go to waste.
No. It's not a complaint. No. It's just noticeable. That's all.
Yeah. Shelley says tonight they came up empty-handed. They didn't win a single match tonight, and they got their asses kicked. Shelley admits that. Shelley says tonight was the start of something else, though, which was Steve Corino interjecting himself into their business. Shelley says they'll send Corino packing back to 0-1, and then Aries does get to talk again. Another moment tonight, an early example of him getting a little bit of mic time, and he points out that they put Cabana on the shelf already, and he says the war has just begun. I should have said has chest begun. We cut, and then finally to end the show, we cut to ringside after the show, where Lacey's half of Special K ambush Dunn and Marcos as they're taking down the ring with the rest of the ring crew. They beat him down as Lacey cheers them on, and that is how we end the show with the Dunn and Marcos beat down by Special K. And that
do you think? I was gonna say, do you think that they should have worked more on ending the shows with like the more major stuff? Because like there's been a lot of shows through the years where they're just like, here, have this lower card angle and have that be the last thing that we see. Like, do you think they should avoid doing that, or do you think it's fine?
I don't think it's the most major problem, but I probably would try and end, like, especially when you consider the last thing people see Ring of Honor was a DVD product. They were trying to sell DVDs. You want something that's really going to, like, I have to buy the next show. And if the ending note of the show is, I don't know how many people are going, it's cool, I would like to see it, but how many people are going to end the show going, I have to buy the next show because I have to see where Dunn and Marcos versus the Special K goes. Like,
yeah,
you generally would want to end probably, if I was running it, not to say I could do a better job, but end with a juicier hook for the next show than that.
Even just the Generation X promo, it's like at least it's top card guys. But that said, as far as like complaints go, it's pretty minor. And like for this show, I almost feel like bad about recent shows that I have had so little to complain about. Like I almost feel like I'm dull in my analysis. Like ROH has just been good lately. The booking has been good. The matches are usually good. The things that are wrong with it are minor. This was a good show. It just like was good. Like that's pretty much all I can say about it. It certainly wasn't the biggest show in ROH history. It certainly didn't have any matches of the year. It certainly, none of that. It's just like a really good, entertaining wrestling show with good wrestling up and down the show and logical, sensible booking.
I thought this was a show where I also agree it was a good show. I agree with the problem I've been struggling with too, which is how many matches can we just say it was good? It's easy to talk about saying when it's amazing, a match or a show, and it's easy to talk about saying when it's really bad. But when it's just consistently hitting like 3.5 stars, 3 3/4, like match after match, and even the bad stuff's like 3 stars, it gets hard to just give the same answer over again of like, oh, yeah, that was good. But Ring of Honor really was hitting just this amazingly this a really great level of depth where it was almost impossible, even when things weren't quite clicking, to not be at least good. And the show didn't have anything amazing that you need to go out of your way to see. And I thought, to me, that two of the matches on paper I was most looking forward to, the Aries Punk and Danielson Shelley match, were a little bit disappointing. Aries Punk more than a little disappointing, and I actually liked the couple of the matches better than I expected, and we differ on that. But I think overall our opinions kind of meets in the middle, which is it's a good show. I felt like they did for a show with no title changes. I think they did a fairly good job of making it seem like a major special show between the Foley thing and Corino's surprise return. Like, they gave you a couple big things that made it feel like you're getting a little bit over and above. And yeah, the Ring of Honor is just on a real hot streak. It's going to be interesting to see if and when that ends and how. Like, where it feels like even on a show like the Scramble Cage Melee, where we both agree was probably one of Ring of Honor's lesser shows of the year, they've gotten to a point where even when things don't click, it's still good.
Yeah, and we're about to enter October of 2004, which, spoilers, has two matches that are considered two of the best matches in ROH history. One in particular, but the main event of the next show, which I'm sure you'll plug in a minute, is one of my personal all-time favorite matches, and I'm very interested to see how well it holds up. And the other one that we're talking about comes in about a few shows, which is the second CM Punk vs. Samoa Joe 60-minute draw, which is probably, as much as any match, a match that really set Ring of Honor as high as it could have gone at that time. So I don't think we're going to be seeing the hot streak come to an end anytime soon. I think things are actually going to get a little better for a while.
And just to really put a point on that, the next show we'll be covering is, we always do them in order, is early October. So here's some of the stuff you're going to see in the last 3 months of 2004 Ring of Honor. You're going to see Bryan Danielson versus Samoa Joe on the next show. You're going to see CM Punk versus Samoa Joe 2 more times in critically beloved matches. You're going to see Aries versus Joe in the big title change match. You're going to see Danielson versus Jushin Liger. You're going to see Low Key come back. He's going to have a match that I remember people really liking with Jay Lethal. You're going to see him in a tag match with Danielson, Joe, and Liger. You're going to see him wrestle Danielson in a rematch of one of the greatest matches in Ring of Honor history, which that one we'll see how it holds up, the rematch. But the point is, all of these matches are in the next 3 months of chronological time.
Yeah. Even some sleeper matches that I remember. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that submission match between Alex Shelley and Jimmy Jacobs on the next Chicago show holds up so many years later. It's going to be quite a run. I mean, it was quite a run, and it's going to be quite a run for this. There's really only one show in that whole mix over the next few months that even would be considered a B show, I would say.
Yeah.
Which is ROH Gold. But the rest of them are like A+ shows, and it's going to be crazy.
Matt, it's the one thing in our lives right now that's actually on an upswing. Like, everything else in life feels like a dark era, but we finally, Matt, gotten to what is like a golden era for the stupid wrestling podcast we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a golden era. I mean, if you've listened to the last few podcasts, I mean, really since this Generation Next, right? It's just been like one good show after another, basically. And I don't think the next one's going to change that. I am so looking forward to reviewing Danielson against Samoa Joe. You have no idea.
I can't wait either. And so it's nice to be able to be positive about something. So that brings us to the end of the show. Plugs. If you want to follow us on Twitter, where I've been grumpy lately, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, and Matt is at Mayor MGF. We have an email if you want to contact us via email. That is through-the-years@gmail.com. As always, through is spelled THROH. There's a thread on the Pro Wrestling Only message board where in the plug section, just for our podcast, if you prefer to contact us there. I have a Patreon that I mentioned earlier, www.patreon.com/mecha, and it feels, honestly, unless you have a lot of money right now, there's way better I mean, there's always better uses of your money than my Patreon, but it feels really gauche to ask for subscribers when there's so much more you could donate. If you're absolutely rich and you've already donated to other good causes and you have more money to throw away, maybe then someone quit subscribing this month, because I complained about Jackson Riker defending Donald Trump. So there's an opening. But other than that, that is the show. Next time, as we've already basically given away, me in particular, we will be covering the Midnight Express reunion show, which is famous for a big time, finally, after they've teased it for, in a way, teased it for maybe like upwards of a year, Bryan Danielson versus Samoa Joe for the Ring of Honor World title, plus the return of Jim Cornette with the big Midnight Express reunion. Plus, I believe is that the show where Low-Ki comes back and wrestles Jay Lethal? I think so.
Anyway, it is. It definitely is. Yes.
So big show. Can't wait to review that. I hope you guys hopefully took something positive away from the start of the show, and I hope the 3 hours that followed, or 2.5, or whatever it was, gave you a chance to take a break from it. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. Try and understand each other. Keep fighting in any way you can. And thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back. Until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.